it's Conrad Thompson, and you're listening to 83 Weeks with Eric Bischoff. Eric, what's going on, man? How are you?
I'm doing great. Just doing great. Went over to our neighbors. I'm not a very neighborly guy. I kind of like being left alone. That's why I like living where I live.
Sure.
But we've got these neighbors by the name of Lou and Amy, and they're from Philadelphia. Lou is a retired cop. Boy, has he got some stories. Holy smokes. But he's a big-time Philly guy. Like Philly this, Philly that, Philly this. Everything's Philly. Invites me over all the time to watch Philly sports, and I'm just not into it. But he's a fun guy. He's funny as hell. He's got great stories. Anyway, we wanted to be nice. They invited us over for cocktails, so we thought, let's make some appetizers. Well, that's something that Lou and Amy would really like because all they ever talk about is Philadelphia. So Lori found a recipe for Philly cheesesteak stuffed mushrooms.
Wow.
And it involves, ground beef and a bunch of stuff. You mix it all together to get that Philly cheesesteak flavor, right, and consistency. But I thought, wait a minute. Let's use Riverbend Ranch because you can get it like a pound instead of ground beef. It's like diced steak. And we use the diced steak as a stuffing, as part of the stuffing ingredient, along with everything else that goes in there. And they were phenomenal. I mean, life-changing phenomenal, right? But I put it on video chain. I taped it or, videoed it on my phone, Lori making it, putting the recipe together and all that stuff so we could use it down the road. And then I took my camera, obviously, I took my phone over to Lou and Amy's house, and I filmed them opening this thing up and trying this. And Lou's like this no bullshit kind of guy. He doesn't say things just to be kind or nice. He's very, very straightforward. That's why I like him. And he bit into, he took a mouthful of one of these Philly cheesesteaks. No, they're Riverbend Ranch Philly cheesesteak stuffed mushrooms. That's a freaking mouthful.
Yeah.
But it was so fun, man. He just lit up. They were so good. It was a great recipe. So that was my day yesterday. I found a good mushroom recipe.
Well, I like it.
It's my life. I don't know what's going on here. Well, that was like my highlight of my day.
You have a lot going on here. We want to talk about the water fast. We kept up with it over social media. I want to pick your brain about that. We're going to do that towards the end of the show and jump into some wrestling today. But first, I want to say happy anniversary, Eric. I can't believe this is a real thing. This is our 300th episode of 83 Weeks. And I know that when we first started this podcast, one of us didn't think this thing was going to last. But boy, has our relationship grown, and we have had so much fun. And I want to thank you for the time and opportunity and chance to do this. And I know we both want to thank all of our listeners because you guys have kept us going. Not a lot of podcasts make it to 300. And as I was talking to Dave Green this past week, we just had our most successful month we've ever had last month. And that's because of you guys. So thank you for all that you do and supporting the show. And thank you, Eric, for making this a priority. And one of the best parts of my week every week is sitting down with you.
Wow. Thank you for saying that. And obviously I feel the same way. And Dave Silva is producing with us right now. Dave does such an amazing job and has from the very beginning. Got us off to a great start with some of the great artwork that comes along with each one of our podcasts. I think that was one of the things right away that made us different.
Yes.
And really contributed to the success of this podcast. And yeah, I mean, if you go back, think back to the first time you invited me to come to your house.
Yeah.
And just sit down with you and your buddies. I mean, if somebody would have told me, when I left your house and went back to the hotel to find out that my flight was canceled and I was going to spend another night in Huntsville, that night when I was sitting at the bar, if somebody would have come up to me and said, "Hey, guess what? You're going to do like 300 podcasts with that guy. You just
no chance, zero chance."
I would have slammed someone's face into the bar for saying it to me, and neither one of us thought we'd probably ever do business together again, right? And then in the first podcast, we talked about it. So we didn't make any big. It's not like we were getting married. We didn't sign a long-term contract. Right. It's like, well, let's do a few, and hey, if it's fun, we'll keep doing it. If it's not, we won't.
Yeah.
And that's the way you and I went into this. And I'm so grateful because this is so much fun for me. And it's helped me, not to get too heavy, but going back and looking and breaking things down and discussing them, it's given me a different perspective on my career and a much healthier perspective. I can look and laugh at some of the stupid shit I did and some of the mistakes I made and as well as learn from it, but not take things as personally as I probably used to take them. This has been a form of therapy for me. So I thank you and Dave and everybody, Chris McDonald, everybody behind the scenes that makes this podcast so cool, but especially the people that listen to it, because we've made some good friends along the way.
Yeah, no doubt. Greatly appreciate all you guys' support. It means the world to us. And of course, you can get more of us over at adfreeshows.com. We've got bonus content there every single month. And today we thought, you know what better way to sort of celebrate our anniversary than to throw the keys to you guys. So instead of us driving and directing traffic, we're doing an Ask Eric Anything for episode 300 today. And we got just an absolute ton of questions. Before we get into it though, Eric, I wanted to talk to you about a few things that happened in wrestling in the last week. We saw CM Punk come back and do a promo on SmackDown on Friday night. And that got a lot of people's attention, or I guess we saw it on Monday rather. And then we saw CM Punk on SmackDown, and we also saw him come out on NXT. And there was an NXT special this past Saturday night that coincidentally was heads up against Collision. And what do you know? We're going to start the show with CM Punk and Shawn Michaels. This is, it's going to be interesting. You know, Punk has sort of declared that he's trying to finish the story. And for him, that means main eventing WrestleMania. I know a lot of people like that promo. And then we see him again on an NXT show, heads up with Collision. What are you thinking of what we're seeing so far of CM Punk and WWE?
Well, it's working, right? I mean, great reaction. It started out great, with a fantastically timed surprise at the end of a pay-per-view or PLE, as opposed to the beginning, which is or somewhere in the middle. I thought it was so well done, and I talked about it last time. Story, anticipation, reality, surprise, and action. So far, WWE has checked and double checked and triple checked each one of those boxes. And there's no, with the exception of action, because we haven't seen that happen yet, but we all know that it will, and at a pretty high level. So I think because they've checked every one of those boxes, not once, but not twice, but 3 times, this is going to be huge. It's going to be great for CM Punk. He'll be, providing he doesn't melt down and do some stupid shit. But if he keeps his act together and maintains, a professional approach to this, he's going to be hotter than he ever was. And hats off to him, and hats off primarily to WWE, because they're doing it right.
I wanted to also ask, what your gut feeling is, and if it's changed, what would you do at WrestleMania? This is a hot button topic right now. Everybody wants to know what to expect with CM Punk and Cody Rhodes and Roman Reigns. And I've seen a lot of theories that say, hey, let's do Cody and Roman on night 2 and maybe Punk and Seth on night 1. But we did hear CM Punk talking about Seth Rollins and talking about Roman Reigns and the wise man. What would you do if you had 2 nights at WrestleMania? What would you do with Cody and Punk and Roman? Oh my.
I'm already convinced it's going to be Seth and Punk. I mean, from the get-go, Seth's reaction outside of the ring when Punk first showed up, well done, by the way. Felt very believable and real, and perhaps some of it was. It's one of the great things about taking personal issues from outside of the ring and being able to bring them in the ring, turn up the volume on them, and make them a part of the backstory, make them a part of Act 1 to launch the story. It was really well done, but I think because it was so well done and the focus and everything was there, I'm convinced it's going to be Punk and Seth. And yeah, that'd be great. Punk and Seth, night one, and Cody and Roman night two. How could it be any better?
We should also talk about some actual business notes. We saw over this past week, that Brandon Thurston reported about a Mark Shapiro call. He is the TKO COO, the president, if you will, of Endeavor. And as I understand it, boy, there's some news coming out of that makes you look like a visionary. And I wanted to talk
I am a visionary.
I ain't no doubt, but I think sometimes people get confused. But Mark Shapiro, of course, is not a wrestling lifer. And his observation was, we should run fewer house shows. And he specifically said C and D counties. I assume that Huntsville would be one of those markets. Like, we don't get a lot of television here, but we do get house shows. And I'm curious what you thought of the idea that once you get an outsider, someone who's trying to deliver shareholder value, someone who wasn't born and bred and raised in the wrestling business, to come out and say what you said, I don't know, 30 some odd years ago, let's stop running so many house shows. And I also want to ask what you think about the rumor and the speculation that perhaps Nick Khan likes the idea of there being a Vegas residency for WWE. Much like a Cirque du Soleil and things like that. It's like, wait a minute. If Eric got his hands on WCW back in 2001, wasn't he wanting to set up shop and just do the show from Las Vegas? I feel like I've heard all this before, but it was like 20 and 30 years ago, Eric. What do you think?
Yeah. This is the first I heard that Nick Khan is interested in a Vegas residency, but very, very cool. But yeah, I mean, look, one of the things that was probably the catalyst for me eventually taking over complete control of WCW, because if you remember, when I was first, executive producer, Bob Dew essentially ran the company, every aspect of the company other than television production. So as executive producer, that was my domain, just the physical production of the show. One of the things that happened, that occurred, that changed that was a meeting that we had, department heads, VPs, directors, so forth, with Bill Shaw at a meeting, and we were discussing, financials and trying to come up with a budget. We started that process, and we were all charged with, okay, tell us what you're going to do next year. And I believe this was in 93. Tell us what you're going to do next year to reduce expenses and increase revenues. All of us were charged with the same task. And Bob Dew and a guy by the name of Don Sandiford. We talk a lot about Gary Juster. Don Sandiford was brought in by Bob Dew to essentially oversee arenas internally in the house show schedule. I think Gary Juster reported to him at the time. I'm not sure. Pretty sure he did. Anyway, Don Sandiford and Bob Dew worked on this plan and brought it to the budget meeting and said, here's what we're going to do to make house shows profitable. And they decided to increase the number of house shows.
Yeah.
I'm going to tell the whole story again because we've all heard it. And in the meeting, and this is me not being very familiar with the corporate environments and not being corporately very civilized, I raised my hands and wait a minute, you're losing money every time. It literally is my word for word. You're losing money every time you go out the door. So your solution is to go out the door more often. That's interesting. That created a scene. And I think it was a month later, Bob was moved over to some other Turner thing, and Don Sandiford was let go, and I was made senior vice president, I believe, or executive vice president, and basically oversaw everything. And it was that decision, my decision and advocacy of cutting back on house shows. And my reason for it wasn't like, not a financially educated person. It's not, I didn't come from finance. That wasn't my thing. But it was common sense.
Right.
And I said to Bill, here's my solution for the whole company. Let's shut everything down that's not related to television and pay-per-view so that we can put whatever resources we do have, we can invest those resources in the foundation of the company, the things that make people want to come to an arena, because right now they don't care. It was horrible. So we cut out house shows. We invested our resources in upgrading the television production, going to Disney, that kind of thing, just improving the overall quality of the show. And things started turning around. So I think in WWE's case, obviously a much different scenario. We were losing money. We were hemorrhaging money. WCW was hemorrhaging money when I was made executive producer, and we had a long way to go to kind of balance that out. WWE is clearly not hemorrhaging money. They're printing that shit.
Yeah, they are.
They're doing very well, but it's a publicly held company. Their fiduciary responsibility is to their shareholders. They have to do what's in the best interest of their shareholders, they meaning WWE. And if you look at the picture and you're looking at these C&D counties and you're realizing it's costing you as much to go as you bring in, or perhaps you're actually losing money. I don't know what the situation is in WWE, but they're not profitable. Why do them? What is the upside of going to these C&D counties where you're breaking even or possibly losing money, and then you run the risk of injuries and all the things that come with it? If they're not profitable, focus on the things that are, and that's what I think they're doing. They, again, meaning WWE.
Well, of course, it's created a bit of a debate because there's a lot of discussion about reps, and I do want to talk to you about that and how important that may or may not be. Yeah. But I think at the end of the day, we can all agree, the company is going to be managed and making decisions differently. They're going to try to maximize every revenue opportunity they have. And I know that a lot of us try to do that in our real life. And I got to admit, when I first started podcasting, an online store was like the furthest thing from my mind. But now, man, we're selling 83-week stickers and hoodies, and it's so easy, all because we use Shopify. And, if you hear that sound right there, that sound right there lets you know we're making money with Shopify. Shopify is a global commerce platform that helps you sell at every stage of your business. From launch your online shop stage to your first real life store stage, all the way to, did we just hit 1 million order stage? Shopify is there to help you grow. Whether you're auctioning autographed apparel or selling skis, Shopify can help you sell anything everywhere. From their all-in-one e-commerce platform to their in-person POS system, whatever and wherever you're selling, Shopify has you covered. Shopify actually turns browsers into buyers with the internet's best converting checkout, up to 36% better compared to other leading commerce platforms. And you can sell more with less effort thanks to Shopify Magic. Yeah, check this out. It's your AI powered all-star. I gotta admit, this is not something that we were like a natural born expert at. I don't think it's a surprise that Eric doesn't have a huge merchandising background. Yes, there were businesses that he ran that had that, but Eric wasn't in that division. And man, I was just working mortgages. How are we going to sell t-shirts and tumblers and towels? And Shopify made it easy for us to get started, and they made it easy for us to grow. They give you everything you need to take control of your business and then take that business to the next level. Shopify powers 10% of all e-commerce here in the United States, and Shopify is the global force behind Allbirds, Rothy's, Brooklinen, and millions of other entrepreneurs of every size across 175 countries now. Plus, Shopify's extensive help resources are there to support you and your success every step of the way, because businesses that grow with Shopify. Sign up for a $1 per month trial at shopify.com/83weeks, all lowercase. Go to shopify.com/83weeks now to grow your business, no matter what stage you're in. That's shopify.com/83weeks. So Eric, the other thing that people want to talk about when they talk about the house shows are, that's the difference between WWE performers and AEW performers. WWE affords the talent more opportunity for reps because they are running these non-televised events. So you get an opportunity at the NXT level and at, the Raw and SmackDown level to sort of hone your craft without the pressure of being on a national or global television stage. Do you think reps not being there are going to be a big challenge for WWE when they cut back on house shows? Or do you think that Vegas opportunity could be the answer to that?
Number one, they're reducing their house show schedule by 23 events. We're only talking about 23 C&D County events over the course of the year. It's really not going to have any impact at all on the number of reps or the opportunities the talent gets to work in front of a live crowd without television, which that's a big deal. And I think that is a major difference, one of the major differences between WWE and AEW. And not just because, well, for a couple different reasons. And again, I'm not speaking from the perspective of a professional wrestler because I've never been one. I've never been on the road 200 days a year in the ring, taking bumps and that kind of thing. So I don't know firsthand from where I speak, but I do know from working with a lot of talent over the past 30 years, 35 years now, those reps are important for a couple reasons. One is conditioning. Your body gets used to taking bumps.
Yes.
I've heard over the years, countless numbers of very high level performers that all have said in one way, shape, or form that they're not worried about getting hurt so much in the ring when they're working constantly. Where injury becomes a greater risk is when they've been off for extensive periods of time and they haven't been able to keep their body in bump shape, not cardio shape, not like in the gym throwing weights around. That's not the same thing. Taking those bumps every single day, your timing and just your body getting conditioned to it. You watch an MMA fighter, watch a boxer, watch anybody who's in combat sports, training for that combat sport. A good portion of that training is them just getting their midsection worked over. They're not taking headshots, obviously, but their midsections are getting worked over every single day for the same reason. You want to condition your body to take that kind of impact and punishment and be able to perform under those conditions. When you take that away from a professional wrestler and they're out for a couple of weeks at a time because they just don't have anything going on or they're just not being used, they don't have access to a training facility like the Performance Center, that's when they're going to get hurt. And especially in AEW right now, because I think, unfortunately, you've got a lot of great talent out there that aren't working house shows, that aren't working the indie scene. So the only time they are working is when they're doing a television or pay-per-view. Well, guess what happens? You're amped up. You got more adrenaline. This is television. It's live. This is a pay-per-view. It's live. And because you haven't been working, you get yourself so geared up and intense going into that you have an even greater likelihood of getting hurt because you're pushing harder than you might otherwise, given the fact that it's live and it's the only time you get to perform. That's the issue there. The other injuries, the other part of it, I think that's not so obvious, but maybe more important, is those non-televised live events are where talent gets to try things.
Yes.
You get, hey, instead of doing what we did last night, let's do this instead and see how the audience reacts. So you're essentially working on your match, your story, your angle, whatever it may be. You're working on that in front of a live focus group that's paying you to be a part of that focus group. That's pretty cool.
Yes.
As a producer, developer, creator of content, when you can go out and experiment in front of a live crowd and get that immediate live real feedback, that's an incredibly valuable if you use it correctly and you're paying attention to it. That, I think, is one of the biggest differences. But again, that's not going to be affected by, I don't think, by the 23 events that are happening in C&D counties over the course of a year. There's plenty of other opportunity for that to happen in WWE. But I do think in AEW, it's one of the things that's sorely lacking because, again, not to be negative, I'm not beating up on anybody, but I know the narrative, the internet wrestling community narrative is, the wrestling is so much better. I'm sorry, I don't see it. I just don't see it. I do not see the in-ring work being noticeably better. In fact, the opposite. It's not up to the same par as WWE. It's just not. You may have an exception here or there, but overall, a lot of the things I see in AEW where the timing is bad, Placement is bad. Footwork is bad. It's just not good. It's not tight. And I think it's not because the talent doesn't have the ability. I just don't think it's because they have the opportunity to really tighten up their product.
I want to talk to you a little bit about AEW, but before we do, I want to ask you about Ring of Honor, because as you and our folks are listening to this weekend is the next big Ring of Honor pay-per-view. And I've said it many times here before on the show that I feel like AEW over delivers on pay-per-view. I feel like they really are at their best at super serving their audience on pay-per-view. Ring of Honor has their next big offering this weekend. And as we're recording, about 1,000 tickets have been sold. And I'm curious, let me just run through the matches right fast. We got Dalton Castle versus Commander versus Kyle Fletcher versus Lee Johnson versus Lee Moriarty versus TBD. It's the survival of the fittest finals for the vacant ROH television championship that Samoa Joe forfeited. We got Keith Lee taking on Shane Taylor, an I Quit match with Tony Nese and Ethan Page. Glad to see Ethan on TV again. FTR is going to be teaming with Mark Briscoe, taking on the Blackpool Combat Club with Bryan Danielson, John Moxley, and Claudio Castagnoli. So they've really loaded that one up. And we've got Athena and Billy Starks. So it's a Ring of Honor pay-per-view with some guys who've been on big time shows. I mean, Bryan Danielson has main evented WrestleMania on more than one occasion. And we know John Moxley as Dean Ambrose was a superstar in WWE and obviously one of the first big surprise talents and really carried a lot of the load here for AEW. But for whatever reason, it's a pay-per-view that's only sold 1,000 tickets. And I think a lot of people are wondering, hey, what is the shot in the arm for Ring of Honor? Do you have a opinion or thought process about how do we get more, interest in the Ring of Honor brand?
No. It was a bad decision to bring it. It was a bad decision to buy it in the first place. And there's nothing anybody's going to do to make it interesting or important outside of the hardest of hardcore internet wrestling community fans. That's it. There is no solution. If it was a horse, I'd put it out of its misery.
Oh, wow.
And move on. I would take the resources that are going into Ring of Honor, which is never going to be viable ever. I would take the resources that are being dumped into that and put it into my core product, my Dynamite. By putting Bryan Danielson and the rest of the people that they put into this thing, you're diluting their characters. You're making them look like independent wrestlers. You're not elevating their characters in any way, shape, or form. In fact, you're doing exactly the opposite. It's really unbelievable to me. And I don't know what the drive is. Is it ego? Is Tony just said, I did this and I'm going to prove I can make it work? It's certainly not because it's a great revenue opportunity. It dilutes the core product. It's being shoved down the audience's throat, and they're gagging on it. They're gagging on it. AEW did 850,000 viewers with Christian and Edge last week after they did their best to build it up, and that's all you can bring in. You got to ask yourself why. It's a really powerful word. Why? Why aren't fans spending more time with the AEW product? Why is Dynamite unable to break 1 million viewers more than once or twice or 3 times a year? What is it about this brand? It's the product. It's the way characters are being developed or not being developed. It's focus, it's vision, it's a lot of things. But Ring of Honor is just a distraction, and it dilutes the core business. It dilutes the characters that are part of it. It's almost embarrassing to me that it's happening. I don't understand it at all. I hope it works. I hope so. I hope a year from now you can go back. Remember when you said, and I'd have to admit that I was wrong. But so far, when it comes to AEW, I've been right far more often than I've been wrong. And for 2 years, is focus on the core product, focus on Dynamite, not all of these other shows. You don't have the creative infrastructure or a formula or a vision that's working. So if you don't have a formula or a vision that's working and you don't see any kind of upward growth in your product, why would you expand it? And I don't want to hear about the money because I hear Dave Meltzer talking about, AEW's gross, all this. Gross doesn't mean shit. You know that, Conrad.
Yeah.
I don't care what a company's gross revenues are. That's such horse shit. Net revenues, yeah. Let's talk about, EBITDA, earnings before interest, depreciation, whatever the hell it is. Let's talk about those numbers, but you're never going to hear about those numbers from Dave Meltzer, right? He's going to talk about the gross numbers. Tony Khan's going to talk about the gross numbers. They can't possibly be making money. They can't possibly be making. How's that video game doing, by the way? Have you heard? Yeah, neither have I. Neither is anybody else. It's focus on the core product. Get your foundation underneath you. It's like Tony Khan's trying to build a mansion on sand with no foundation. Find the right property. Find the right terra firma. Find solid ground. Build a solid foundation. And then build your house. Tony's trying to build a mansion and he hasn't put the basement in yet, or he hasn't put the foundation in yet. It's crazy to me, but whatever. Hey, he's got all the money in the world, so I guess it doesn't matter. But it does matter to the talent that participate in it because their lights are being diminished. There's the shine on their stars are being dulled by being involved in things like Ring of Honor. Bryan Danielson and Ring of Honor, excuse me. You so often you hear the fan base, the internet wrestling fan base, talking about how someone is used right or not used right. Here you got a whole collection of top tier talent that are recognizable, have just about anywhere in the world to wrestling fans, and you're putting them on Ring of Honor. And by the way, you sold 1,000 tickets. What does that tell you? Or more importantly, what should that tell you?
Well, do you think it's a chicken and the egg deal? I mean, do you think it's one of those deals where he thinks if I load it up with enough star power and get enough attention to it, then I can perhaps leverage that to create a new television opportunity? I mean, I would,
if that's his, then he's not that smart. I've often, conceded that Tony Khan's probably much smarter than I am in a lot of different ways, but in terms of business strategy, wrestling business strategy, if that is Tony's thinking, then he's more inadequate than I thought he was.
Well, let's say Ring of Honor was going to be the AEW answer for NXT. How do you launch an NXT for?
Keep it separate. Keep it separate. Don't cross over. My God, he's got enough talent, right? Keep it separate. Two different companies. Treat it as two different companies. Don't have your Ring of Honor titles being defended on Dynamite. You're diluting your own product. It's insanity. There is no example in history of that working. And it's certainly not working in the present. Neither one of those two brands, Ring of Honor or Dynamite, are benefiting from it. It's been going on now for a year and a half?
Yeah.
It ain't working. Just wake up, have a cup of coffee, put your glasses on, look at the numbers and go, it's not working. And it hasn't been working for a long time. There's nothing to indicate that it may work in the future. Why in the world would you keep doing it if it's not for your ego? I would treat them separate. To answer your question, absolutely treat them separately. Just like WWE did, I think, for a long time. There wasn't a lot of crossover between NXT and the main roster. If you got called up, that was a big damn deal.
Yes.
And there was a lot of chatter about it. But up until recently, you didn't see a lot of crossover between the two for many, many years.
But I would argue that crossover is what helped land them the new deal with CW for allegedly more money. Like, isn't that part of the formula? Like, get stars on that program and then people will pay more money for it?
No. They're not going to just pay more money because they're stars on the program. Do you think program executives are fucking wrestling marks that are sitting around, on Reddit talking
Eric.
about wrestling? They don't care. What they care about is growth and performance.
Yeah, but the stars are what do that, Eric, right? Like,
stars are a part of what do that, but building that building that brand on its own, so that NXT had its own identity. How many years has NXT been on television before there was any crossover? And there was growth. It was a separate entity and was treated as such. Build the foundation and then bring your big stars over and do some crossover.
Well, the reality is, I don't mean to cut you off, but NXT did not just grow. Like, they went on TV. It was a big competition. They were in a big lull. They sort of reimagined the look and feel of the show. That got a tepid response. And then they started dripping stars over. And you started to see guys like CM Punk and guys like John Cena and guys like The Undertaker, and then really extended runs with ladies like Becky Lynch, big stars, the man. And they've enjoyed their best ratings ever from having established stars from the other big brand on that program. Like, to me, that seems to be the formula that got them with CW in this bigger deal.
Sure. And everything that you just said absolutely happened within the last 8 months.
Yes.
It didn't happen right away. Ring of Honor immediately became a part of the Dynamite show before the brand was ever really established outside the fistful of internet wrestling fans that love it. You have to establish the brand first. You have to give it its own identity. Let it become something different than the core product. If you would have gone back when NXT first started and started having the crossover and talent jumping back and forth right off the bat, I don't think we'd be talking about CW or NXT, because it would have hurt the core product and therefore would have come to an end. Does that make sense? I mean, I'm not saying if you agree with it, but I just want to make sure I'm clear. You have to build the brand. It has to stand on its own. It has to perform on its own without diluting the core product. Right now, Ring of Honor is like a giant freaking parasite on the AEW brand. And the more focus they put on the parasite, the more that parasite is going to diminish or harm the core brand.
Well, here's
maybe a time, Conrad. Maybe there'll be a time down the road when that makes sense. But I just think they bumblefucked it up so badly that we won't really see a successful Ring of Honor anytime in our lifetime.
Well, let me say this. If you want to see Ring of Honor up close and personal this weekend and you're looking for great seats, can I recommend Gametime? Gametime is going to give you a seat map and perspective from your seat, so you know exactly what to expect when you get there. Not only that, but they've got killer last minute deals, and they're going to show you the all-in price. You know, some of their competitors out here, they'll show you one price, but by the time you add it to your cart and go to check out, you're like, wait, that was a lot more than I was expecting. You'll never get that with Gametime. What you will get, though, is the best deal you've ever had. I've told the story many times here on the program before, but my daughter was looking for tickets for a sold-out concert. The best she could find on another third-party site was the last row. That's right, the very nosebleed last row. Her back's up against the concrete of the building. But old Dad pulled out the Gametime app, and I got her front row tickets for about $20 more. That's a real story, and it can be a story that you have a similar version of if you just go download the Gametime app. They've got it for everything. You can get tickets to sports and music and comedy and theater. Whatever you're looking for, they can hook you up, and you can shop with confidence because they have a lowest price guarantee. Let me explain. It's called the Gametime Guarantee, where they guarantee you always get the best price. If you find tickets in the same section and row for less money, Gametime won't just credit you the difference. They'll credit you 110% of the difference. So not only did you get a good deal, you got the best deal. And as I said, you get that site POV, like they show you, hey, here's what your view will look like. So you don't have to wonder looking at a seat map. Is this obstructed? Is this a good seat? Am I going to have a good time? Hell yeah, you are. Not only that, but check this out. I've never even heard of this. With Gametime, you can actually buy tickets, not only as late as the day of, because I've told that story here before. I bought my daughter these concert tickets the afternoon before the show, like 3 hours before showtime. That's when we got the tickets. But with Gametime, you can actually buy tickets even an hour after it starts. So if you're going to see a big concert, well, you're probably going to see the headliner. So So you might miss an opening act, but you might get the best deal ever thanks to Gametime. This is a real life hack. You're going to get the best seat possible at the best price possible. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Just download the Gametime app, create an account, and use the code WEEKS for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem the code WEEKS, WEEKS, for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. So Eric, let's talk about some behind the scenes of wrestling. And then I do want to get into all these questions. We got a ton to get to, but man, there's been some big news in the last several weeks of AEW, and we haven't talked a lot about it because it happens behind the scenes. And really a lot of fans probably aren't seeing that this is all a huge deal, but I think it's a really big old deal. You know, I know as fans, we like to focus on creative and what we see on television, but behind the scenes, QT Marshall, who's a day one AEW guy, he's gone. He's worked and wore a lot of hats in AEW behind the scenes. Kevin Sullivan, another day one AEW guy who had a long history at TNA and Impact, and a Nashville based guy, and he's out. And there's rumors that there's another name. I don't know that that's my place to say, but talk to me about it. What do you think of all these behind the scenes goings on? I mean, we've seen before Keith Mitchell leave, and now Kevin Sullivan's out. And now QT Marshall's out. There's rumor there's another. I mean, a lot of the behind the scenes staff is leaving AEW. And I guess there's two ways to look at that. On the one hand, it's, oh my God, the sky's falling. This is disastrous. And the other hand is, hey, you know what? If you've recognized that for whatever reason, something isn't working, that is the time to make a change. And I know that nobody likes change, but everybody likes improvement. And maybe they feel like there's some necessary things that need to happen, and maybe Tony allowed it to be their idea. But I know some folks have, quit, and other folks have been released. What do you make of all the behind the scenes moving and shaking in AEW?
I think, for me, I look at it from a macro perspective, step back and look at the big picture. And yes, all of the aforementioned names have either resigned or been asked to leave. It's interesting, but when you look at the totality of it, let's start with Cody Rhodes, Jade Cargill, CM Punk, for crying out loud. It sounds bizarre that, CM Punk and Shawn Michaels were head to head against Collision. It's like, what happened to the world I used to live in? It's weird. But when you look at the top talent that is unable to function within AEW, when you look at the behind the scenes talent that for whatever reason, their own fault or not, it doesn't matter. They're gone. It kind of paints a little bit of a picture. And I don't want to pretend I know what's going on in AEW because I don't talk to anybody in AEW. I really don't. But it's pretty obvious that there's a leadership issue there. Why did Cody leave? Why did CM Punk leave? And I've been very, very critical of CM Punk and the way he's handled himself, and will stand behind the things I said in the context of when they occurred and how he handled them. But look what's happening now. Look where Punk is now, in a more structured environment where there is leadership and there are protocols and there are guardrails, and you just don't have talent running fucking amok. And trust me, I've been a part of talent fucking running amok, so I'm not throwing stones here. I was responsible for it myself in some regards, but that's one of the reasons why it's obvious to me. I've been there. I've done that. Being able to have a good perspective about the wrestling business isn't about batting 1,000. If you can bat 500 in the wrestling business, you're an all-star. But the value that you get in learning and being in the business is you learn what works, you learn what doesn't work, and you stay away from the things that don't and lean into the things that do, like any other venture or business or job. But what's going on in AEW suggests to me that there's a lack of leadership and a lack of vision. And when that happens, talent and staff, high-level staff, become very frustrated. And that frustration turns into resentment, and the resentment turns into anger, and all of a sudden people start leaving or being asked to leave. And that's what I see. You just go back and look at the very beginning. To lose Cody Rhodes And I still don't know why Cody left. I don't know that anybody does other than Cody and Tony.
He said it's a personal issue.
Well, okay. Well, that covers a lot, doesn't it? I mean, it's a personal issue, but I don't know. I hope things turn around. I hope Tony wakes up one day and goes, okay, I need somebody. It's actually probably several people to really help me turn this thing around. And he reaches out to some really young, professional, experienced people that can bring some stability to the vision and to the company. Because otherwise this is death by 1,000 cuts. I've seen this movie before. This is death by 1,000 cuts.
I don't know that.
Tony has the money. It is, as long as Tony's ego is in the game, as long as Tony's passion is in the game, he'll continue. He can take 2 million cuts, but the product is never going to improve until there's a big change in direction.
Well, that's what I hope that is happening is if we do feel like there is a reason to have concern about business growth or lack thereof, or momentum, or any of those things that we talk about, I hope that some of these changes bring about that positive change for the company. But in regards to the Cody Rhodes thing, I think, and boy, I'm going to get just blown up on social media for what I'm about to say here. But I think in a weird way, and I'm not comparing the two talent, but I think the circumstances are similar. I think Cody Rhodes is going to wind up being his Stone Cold Steve Austin. You know, when you let Steve Austin go, little did you ever imagine, hey, this guy's going to become the top merch seller for WWE and one of their top guys in main event WrestleMania. I don't think you saw that in Steve Austin at the time. And I don't know that Tony necessarily saw that in Cody. Hey, he's going to go main event WrestleMania and be their top merch seller. I just don't think he saw it.
I don't think any of us did. In fairness to Tony, did you see it? I didn't. I mean, I thought the world of Cody, but I guess, let me clarify. I didn't think never would have dreamed it would have happened as fast as it did. Not that Cody didn't have the ability, but for Cody to leave AEW and be in that position that he's in WWE so quickly, that surprised me, and I didn't see that coming.
Well, I've been hanging out with Bruce Pritchard long enough that I've heard enough of these Vince-isms. Like when somebody would say, oh, nobody will believe that. Allegedly, according to Bruce, Vince would say, they'll believe it when they see it. And I thought, hey man, if they get him over here and they start getting him enough wins, just do the Roman model, sort of, you know, and that's what they did. They loaded him up with wins. He had a feud with Seth and it was almost a clean sweep. I did see him coming over and being in the mix and being, you know, positioned as a top guy, because I also knew as a business strategy, boy, you sure do get everybody turning their heads if you have Cody Rhodes, a founding member of the AEW crew, all of a sudden become a top guy here. There's going to be a whole lot of people who left here frustrated like Cody did, who thought maybe the grass is greener over here in AEW, who look back and say, well, if they can do that for him, I mean, I think there was something to that. And I think, you know, with the way they rolled out the red carpet for Jade Cargill, and you've seen what they've done with CM Punk, it feels like WWE is certainly a new place without Vince McMahon at the helm and Hunter's there. And maybe they're trying to send some messages within the industry. Like, I don't know if you saw, but a lot of talent have the week before. I think all talent have the week before Christmas off. Like, there's no event scheduled. That was not the case for a long, long time. Like, I can't tell you how many wrestlers who work for WWE through the years have missed a lot of those holidays or had a day home and then it was time to go again. And now the idea is, you know, let's spend a little more time and prioritize the fam. And I just think it's interesting to think how not only is AEW changing, but WWE is too.
They are. And I was really happy to see that. I mean, because look, again, I can't speak from firsthand experience. The physical drain on a WWE performer in particular, because of the schedule, I can only try to imagine what that's like. And forget about what you do in a ring for 12 or 15 minutes a night. That's hard enough. But traveling, as you know, Conrad, and I experience occasionally now still, traveling is a grind.
Yes.
It is so much harder today than it was 10 years ago. Certainly way more difficult than it was 20 and 30 years ago.
Why do you say that?
I'll speak for myself. I can't get anywhere without at least 2 connections. Now, part of that is because of where I live.
Yeah.
Wyoming. But even if you live in a major market other than, let's say, New York, Atlanta, LA, maybe Chicago, anywhere that you want to go, if you live outside of those markets, anywhere that you want to go, you're going to get a connecting flight. The number of direct flights have been reduced so dramatically over the last 10 or 15 years. But more often than, I would say 50% of the time, just happened to my brother-in-law yesterday, 50% of the time, when you're booked on a flight that's leaving or connecting in Denver, you're going to get an email that says, sorry, flight's been postponed till tomorrow. And it's almost always air traffic control shortages. They've got to slow down the amount of traffic coming in and out of airports because there's a shortage. It's a safety issue. All of those things combined just make it physically more challenging to travel. I think the physical part of traveling is probably the most grueling part of what happens, of the challenge on a talent physically. It's not what's going on in the ring. It's what you have to go through to get to the ring. And then, oh, by the way, you get up the next morning, go off and do it again. That's such a grind, man. I have nothing but admiration for people that do it. It's a physical grind, but it's also a mental and emotional grind. And to your point that led us to this, being able to give talent time with their family is critically important. And when you look at go back and look at the 70s and the 80s or 90s when talent was on the road, and it was why do you think they partied as hard as they did? Not making an excuse for it, but it's a fact of life. You're on the road 52 weeks a year. You're not with your family. You're not in your own bed. There's really not much else to do other than get yourself in trouble and get to the next town. So I think it's overall really, it's great. And I think Triple H probably recognizing, based on what I've heard, recognizing that the talent needs to have a little bit more of a healthy family life and stable family life. I think it's going to be nothing but great for the business.
Well, something that's bad for business, but great for your household is our friends over at Crowd Health. Stop sending money to big insurance companies that profit off of not paying your bills. Did you know that 48 million claims on Obamacare last year were denied? That's 1/5 of claims that are going to get rejected. Do you want to take that chance? Health insurance sucks. It's confusing, it's expensive, and it's frustrating, but there is a better way. Welcome to the alternative. Crowd Health was created to get rid of the headaches of health insurance. For just $175 for an individual or only $575 for a family of 4 or more, you'll get access to a community of people who are willing to help out in the event of an emergency. You'll also get telemedicine visits, discounted prescriptions, and more. All this without doctors' networks getting in the way. Let Crowd Health help with your healthcare needs. You can get started today for just $99 per month for the first 3 months when you use the code WRESTLE to get the healthcare you deserve. Crowd Health is not insurance. Learn more at joincrowdhealth.com. And coming right up after our show today, you can hear an interview I did with Andy, the founder of Crowd Health, to hear more about this new alternative to health insurance. That's coming up at the end of the show today. Once again, the site is joincrowdhealth.com and use the code WRESTLE to get started today for just $99 per month for the first 3 months. So Eric, let's get into our topic today. It's Ask Eric Anything. We've been going for like an hour and we're finally getting to the topic, but there's so many great questions. I don't think we'll get to them all. Let's do as many as we can. Michael wants to know, if there was a film made about the life of Ted Turner, who do you think would be the actor to play Ted? And who would make a great young Eric Bischoff?
Oh gosh, I don't know who would be a great actor to play Ted. I'm sure there are a number of them. I'd have to give that a lot more thought than I can hear on this show. As far same with somebody to play me, that's such a hard question to answer. I think there are others who could probably answer that question much better than I. Hopefully it's somebody that's, with Ted, to talk about the characteristics as opposed to the actor himself, somebody that's known for being a little controversial, living on the edge a little bit, outspoken, unpredictable. That was Ted, right? Ted was a maverick. He did everything different than everybody else. Talk about the controversy equation, man. Ted Turner was very controversial in the media landscape when he was building what became Turner Broadcasting. Very controversial. Nobody thought it would be successful, right? So, yeah, as far as someone who could play me, I don't know. Cocky, arrogant, smarmy. Someone you on any given day, you're not sure if you want to have a beer with him or punch him. That'd be about the right guy to play me.
Eric, throw your spectacles on. I'm going to give you a name to throw in your Google machine and see if you think this guy could play Ted. Toby Huss, Toby, last name Huss, Huss. I fell in love with his work on an AMC show like 10 years ago called Halt and Catch Fire. He's been in a million things. You're going to recognize him as that guy from that thing. But Toby Huss, I think, would make a great Ted Turner. I want you to take a look and see what you think.
Yeah. Yeah, I can see it.
I think he could pull that off.
Yeah, I agree.
While you got your handy dandy machine out, here's an Eric Bischoff for you. I'm going to screw his name up. Andrew Rannells, Rannells, Rannells. That guy could be Eric Bischoff. I could see that.
How do you spell the last name?
Rannells. What do you think? That could be an Eric Bischoff.
I agree.
We'll have Silva.
That'd be fun.
We'll have Silva add that.
I hope somebody does it. Ted Turner deserves a movie.
He does.
He really does.
He really does.
And if you look at all of the entrepreneurs, particularly in the media world, who have made such a dramatic impact on not only the industry, but the culture, the politics. Ted is, in my opinion, the entrepreneur of the year, of the century. I mean, he's done so much. He's right up there with Elon Musk. And I know people are going, what? Elon Musk is putting, rockets in the air and satellites in the sky and electric cars and all the stuff that Elon Musk is doing. But Ted Turner, in his era, during his time, was doing much the same things, much the same way. He was putting where his mouth was, and just changing the industry.
We don't talk about, the television part of your life very much. We always talk about the wrestling part, but I just got to thinking when you were talking about Ted Turner, somebody really needs to do that. Ted deserves a movie. I started thinking, man, we've seen a lot of great series on like Showtime and HBO about things that are, if they're not like Succession, a lot of people think is loosely based on the Murdochs, maybe not all that loosely. And then, we would see other things. Like I know there was a series about Fox News and how they became a thing. I could totally see Ted Turner and all of his influence. And then, it blows up at the end with the whole Time Warner thing. But I mean, we saw the WeWork documentary and the Elizabeth Holmes documentary, all these great, not documentaries, but series, a drama, but loosely based on what happened as a series. The Ted Turner story, man, that's begging to be made. I agree with you. Why hasn't that happened? Do you think it's media rivalries that still exist?
I don't know. I don't have an answer to that. And one of the reasons as we talk about this, I'm getting more excited about it actually, because Ted's story is a cautionary tale. At the end of the day, Ted Turner's, he had his vision, his all the things that we've already talked about, the fact that he worked outside of the paradigm of the existing media industry to build this phenomenon that was the leader in world news and really was not alone, but was very, very much responsible for the growth of cable television in general. But Ted wanted so much. Ted, when I was there, And after, working with Bill Shaw and others who had proximity to Ted's dream for a long time was to own a network. Now, this is back when networks actually made money. They don't make money anymore. The only thing that makes money in a network anymore is the news division. Everything else is a loss leader. But Ted's goal was to own a network, and he wanted that so badly. He tried to buy NBC. I think he tried to buy ABC or CBS once. He tried to buy a network, I think twice, and came up short both times, which is why when the AOL Time Warner opportunity became real, certainly can't speak for Ted and certainly didn't have a conversation with him about this, but what I've been told and what I've read about since was that Ted looked at that AOL Time Warner opportunity as the next best thing to owning a network. And his desire to finally reach that level where he was competitive with the network because he couldn't buy one is what drove him to enter into a deal that ultimately saw him get his legs cut out from underneath him. And he was relegated to a corner office, but had no authority, no voice, no control over the company that he created. And that's the cautionary tale. I think Ted I hate to say it because I have so much respect for Ted Turner, but in his way became greedy. He made a decision because he was so focused on owning a network, and because he wanted to do the next best thing. And the next best thing took him out of his own company.
Let's do another question here from Sean Johnson. This is probably a question you've been asked 100 different times. Maybe you've got an answer here. What was the singular biggest decision you made in your time with WCW that you wish you could have gone back and done over? Is there a single call you wish you could have made differently? I know there's probably a handful, like, oh, maybe I'd do that again or this again, but does one stand out above all the rest?
Part of me is disappointed in myself for not challenging myself to deal with the merger differently than I did. I challenged it. Now, when I say I didn't challenge the merger, right? Not that, but the effects of the merger, the influence of the merger. I've told the story about going to that meeting at Techwood in July of 1998 and sitting around that table. I could have handled that much better. I could have embraced what was happening and aligned myself with that opportunity as opposed to fighting it. I don't think it would have made any difference in the end, to be honest with you, but I think I would have become a better executive in the process. Instead of doing what I did, which was just challenge it, just resist it and fight it, argue about it. There's no way I could win that. And I probably knew that deep down inside, but I wasn't willing to embrace something that I didn't believe in. And that's why this is so hard for me to answer, because I still believe I was right in many respects. In fact, I know I was. It's obvious now.
How old were you then when you were arguing?
How old was I in 1998? I would have been
25 years younger than now. How old are you now?
43.
Okay.
I would have been 43. But I had never worked in a corporate environment before.
Right.
I had always been a sole practitioner, if you will.
Right.
I'd always been self-employed, or the companies that I worked for, long ago, were small family-owned businesses. They weren't corporate environments. I wish I would have challenged myself to adapt and become more of a corporate thinking person, only for my own personal growth, not because it would have changed anything, but I think I would have learned a lot had I taken that approach. I would have learned differently. I learned a lot taking the approach I learned.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it's not that that's not valuable, but I would have learned a lot more if I would have embraced the inevitable as opposed to resisting it.
Instagram, a wrestling historian, has an interesting question, one we've never discussed here. Did you ever consider holding a pay-per-view in a stadium like the Georgia Dome? Thanks in advance. We saw, lots of mega nitros, but we didn't see big domes and things like that for pay-per-views very often. Why was that?
I don't know. Honestly, I don't know. It's a very, very good question and an astute observation on top of it. But I don't even have a good answer for that. You know, you would think, because it wasn't like we were surprised when we filled a dome. We were grateful, but the reason we would go to a dome was because we had all the market indicators to suggest that it was going to be successful. So why didn't we focus on putting a pay-per-view in a dome? The answer to the question is, I don't freaking know.
Ryan Howard says, when you were a part of the commentary team at WCW, who was usually your quote unquote Vince McMahon in your headset? And then secondly, were you ever asked or approached about doing commentary while in WWE?
I never had anybody in my headset. You know,
Nobody produced you.
Nobody produced me.
Okay.
You know, if I had a headset on, or if I had an IFB on, you know, I typically would wear an IFB. That's just so if something were to go awry, there was communication between myself and the director. Somebody got hurt in the ring, or if timing of the show got messed up during the live broadcast and we had to adjust on the fly, I had to know about it. But there was never anybody in there, you know, producing me and guiding me through the play-by-play or anything like that. I don't know that I could have functioned that way. I'm sure I could have learned eventually. Like, you know, you can train a monkey to do anything, I guess. Eventually I would have learned to get more comfortable with it, but I'm glad that I never had to. Let's put it that way. I love doing play-by-play. I think it's or color play-by-play for me more so. When people say, what's the one thing you miss about the wrestling business? Honestly, I miss doing play-by-play. And it's not that I was really that good at it, but I love doing it.
Right.
It's really an art unto itself. And when good play-by-play people are so valuable, they enhance the product so much. And I've told this story before. He's no longer here in Cody. There was a local sports director that covered all of the local sports for the local radio station here in Cody, Wyoming. I think his name was Cole Havens. He was so good that on Saturdays, I would make a point to listen to him call girls' high school basketball. I didn't know anybody on the team. I didn't have any neighbors that had children on the team. I'm not really even very much a basketball fan at all, really. But he was so good at play-by-play. Same thing with baseball. You know, American Legion baseball and high school baseball. He would cover that during the season. And I would make a point of listening to him call games because he was so good at it. Girls volleyball. He made me interested in high school girls volleyball. Not because the sport was that interesting to me, but because the way he covered it was so interesting. And because he allowed me to get to know the players in a way that I otherwise would never get to know them and learn about them and cheer them on. Someone like that is so valuable to the product. That I missed that. And I enjoyed attempting to do that type of thing. I had the luxury of being, I don't want to say trained, but yes, to a degree trained to do play-by-play by Vern and Greg Gagne. You know, and I bust Greg's balls for a lot of reasons, but Greg really understood psychology. He really understood the play-by-play and color combination because Vern really understood it. Vern was very focused on color and play-by-play. You know, he let some things go in the ring, but not on the mic. That was like his pet peeve. And I'm really grateful for that. Really grateful.
Did you, I mean, I don't know that anything ever happened about it, but you know, somebody reached out to me in the last year or two asking, hey, do you think Eric would be interested in doing color commentary for us? And I said, sure. And I think they made a pitch. We don't have to say any names, but did you get pitched on doing commentary? And is it something you would consider for the right fit?
I did. And I miss it, but I don't miss all of the travel
yes.
and everything that goes along with it. So for that reason, look, I am not independently wealthy, as you know, and most people do. I'm not, you know, I'm comfortable. I'm good, but I just am not willing to give up the lifestyle I have and travel and go through what I'd have to do color commentary. And to be honest with you, I don't think I'd be okay on color commentary, but there are people that are better than me. Play by play, if it was the right situation, I could do it from home. Sure. If I didn't have to travel, absolutely. But not color commentary. But yeah, I did get a call or two and nothing came of it because I really wasn't interested.
Lauren Eason has a great question. I'm not sure if either Eric or Conrad has watched the series Heels on Stars, but there was an episode that referenced Ted Turner, and I was wondering if Eric could shine some light to this. A character by the name of Tom King Spade was offered a meeting with Ted Turner about joining WCW. When the secretary said that Ted isn't able to see Tom today, which would have been the second meeting, Tom would insist that he never saw Ted leave the office, and the secretary would reply, he has his own private entrance. So my two-part question is, did Ted Turner actually have his own private entrance? And would Ted actually keep someone waiting that long without actually seeing them?
I don't know if Ted had, because if he had a private entrance, it wasn't apparent to me. I was only in Ted's office one time and I didn't see anything that looked like a door that would lead to an exit or an entrance. I do know that Ted had an apartment on top of the CNN Center at one point. So perhaps maybe that's what somebody was inspired to include in that scene about Ted. Like I said, I was only in Ted's office once, so he didn't keep me waiting. It doesn't sound like Ted Turner. No, I think it was just all fiction. But who knows?
By the way, having a private entrance, not that big a deal. I know multiple CEOs who have a private entrance. Leland Patterson wants to know, hey, Eric, love both your shows. My question is, what do you think is the biggest reason for the WWE boom? It really didn't take off until Vince left creative. It was good right after the pandemic because people were itching to get out. But after that initial boom, it was slowing down. Until Vince left, it's really taken off, and now it's absolutely insane. What do you attribute this most recent WWE boom to, Eric? I mean, obviously there's a lot of different factors. Is there one that stands out above all the rest as being most critical or most important from you?
Discipline, structured story, and character development. And I would disagree to a degree with the person who posed that question. I think the bloodline storyline, which started long before Vince left and was getting very exciting long before Vince left. Vince was very much a part of that storyline. And perhaps some ways, at some points, he held it back. Maybe it could have gotten bigger, faster, stronger sooner. But Vince was very, very much a part of that. Vince's commitment to Roman Reigns. Let's go back now 3, 4, 5 years. Vince was determined to get Roman Reigns over. So people can say, oh yeah, as soon as Vince left, everything got better. It's not a very realistic perspective.
Yeah.
I think things have gotten better since Vince left, only because I think the creative process is now much more efficient. I think your writing team can now, with confidence, start laying out stories without knowing it, not in the back of their mind, in the front of the mind, that there's about a 75% chance. So even though Vince would say, yeah, that looks good on Friday, on the plane going to Raw Monday morning, he might just tear the whole thing up and start over again. That's a very uneasy feeling if you're a creative person. And then you get to the building and you're going to know that you're going to have 2 hours to write a brand new show from top to bottom that has to be approved. Not only does it have to be approved, if there is a spelling error in the first draft of what you think you want to do and you want to present to Vince with only 2 hours before showtime, if he sees a typo or poor grammar, there's a chance he'll just rip the whole thing up without reading anything, the rest of it, and ask you to go redo it and let you know what he thinks of your grammar and your spelling on your way out the door. That's not efficient creative. And it takes a creative person so outside of their game in the train of thought, the frame of mind, the vibe they have to be in. It's a different world being creative. And to have that kind of instability throughout the entire process doesn't get you to the best creative by any stretch of the imagination. And I think now with Triple H in charge, because he was on the receiving end of that.
Yeah.
He took a lot of the shots, right? For, Triple H worked in creative. Stephanie McMahon was head of creative for a long time. Even when I was there in 2019 for a cup of coffee, Triple H wasn't involved in the creative process, but he was sitting right next to Vince McMahon at every production meeting and was involved in trying to fix the things that Vince would point out. So Triple H knows how much of a negative impact Vince's approach to the process, however successful that process was, because if you look at all the things that it created over the years, from Stone Cold Steve Austin to The Rock and John Cena and Undertaker. I mean, so many great things have happened under Vince McMahon's watch. But the fact is, he's a very, very difficult person to work with, and it's not necessary. And I think Triple H saw that and is now streamlining that process. As he does, your creative talent are going to rise. They're going to feel more confident. They're going to be more excited, and you're going to have a better product. And I think that's what we're seeing now. A consistently better product.
We've got another great question coming up, Eric, but I'm going to ask you the question and then we're going to take a break because I want you to think about it and then we're going to come back. But I want you to think about your picks here. Josh B wants to know, who are the 4 closest friends Eric has in the wrestling business that he talks to today? And I realize you're going to have to think there, Eric, because you're going to be picking 4 of your best friends. And speaking of picking, I am excited to talk to you about PrizePicks today. This is the largest daily fantasy sports platform in North America and easily my favorite. They are the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. It's just you against the numbers. You don't have to play against thousands of other players, including pros and sharks. All you're doing is picking more than or less than on 2 to 6 different player stat projections, and then you just watch the winnings roll in. PrizePicks is really the most fun I've had winning, and you can win up to 25 times your money this football season, and now it even works for basketball season. You just pick 2 or more players, pick more or less on their projected stats, and get your spots placed early. That's it. With the basketball season, you can even pick combo projections across football and basketball from the Specials League. It's a league created specifically for combo projections that include 2 or more players from different sports or leagues. Like you could have LeBron James and Travis Kelce at a 10.5 combo of 3-pointers made plus receptions. How fun is that? Get a little bit of action on the LeBron side and the Travis Kelce side. Yeah. You can do it here with PrizePicks. And you can play along some of PrizePicks' favorite players. One of my favorite rappers, Meek Mill, he's on PrizePicks. The comedian Andrew Schultz, who's also got a fabulous podcast, he too is on PrizePicks. You can even see community plays under the promos tab, and you can view some of the entries from some of the biggest names in the whole PrizePicks community each week. And you could be picking this week, like you could say, hey, I want Steph Curry for more than 29 points. Or I want Anthony Davis for more than 2 blocks. Or I want Christian McCaffrey for more than 75 rushing yards. Or Patrick Mahomes for more than 2 touchdowns. PrizePicks even has a reboot policy so that your entries stay in play even if one of your guys gets injured. For football and basketball games, if you have a player who exits the game in the first half and does not return in the second, the player is rebooted. PrizePicks is the only DFS platform with an injury insurance policy like this. You can turn like $10 into $250 in a few taps. It's so simple to play PrizePicks. You just make your picks and you get started with your entries in less than 60 seconds. They've got quick withdrawals. They've got easy gameplay. They got an enormous selections of players and stat types. I think they are truly the #1 daily fantasy sports app. PrizePicks has weekly promotions like Taco Tuesday. They're going to go ahead and discount select player projections up to 25%. That's going to get you even more value. And they just added Apple Pay. So it's quick and easy to get deposits into your account just in time for this college football playoff season and the rest of the NFL season. And now all the basketball stuff. Come on. I have absolutely loved my time on here. I think you will too. And I want you to go try it. I want you to go to prizepicks.com/83weeks. I want you to use the code 83weeks and you're going to get a first deposit match of up to $100. That's prizepicks.com/83weeks. Use the code 83weeks and you'll get a first deposit match of up to $100. It's PrizePicks, daily fantasy sports made easy. So Eric, what do you think? Who are the 4 closest friends you have in the wrestling business that you talked to today?
Okay. This is a tough one. Couple things. Number one, I'm anybody that knows me, including my close family, my brother and my sister, who I love dearly. I talk to them on the phone maybe twice a year. I'm not that, I don't stay in touch very well.
And when you do get on the phone, they're quick calls.
Generally.
Yes.
Generally. And I'm going to limit these choices to the people that I actually worked with in the wrestling business while I was active in the wrestling business. Okay. I would say, not in any order, but these are the 4 people that I would consider close friends. Bruce Pritchard. Bruce and I started working together when I first got to WWE. Our relationship grew in WWE. Our friendship grew in WWE, even more so in TNA. And I think the world of Bruce. Have a lot of admiration for him. Hulk Hogan, for sure. Over the years, ups, downs, sideways. It's been a challenging relationship since day one. But at the end of the day, definitely Hulk Hogan. Diamond Dallas Page. Here's a guy that I probably talk to on the phone once every 2 years. But when I do, if I do, or more importantly, if we run into each other in an event and we have time, because oftentimes he's busy and I'm busy, we don't really have time. But if there's time, we could sit down over, a dinner and it's like no time has passed. That to me is a good friend. DDP and his wife, Paige, came out and visited Lori and I a couple of years ago, 2 years ago, I think, here in Wyoming in the summertime. And we just had an amazing time with him. And it's absolutely like he still lived down the street from me and no time had passed. That to me is a good friend. Kevin Nash, same thing. Again, much like Hulk, did we have a tumultuous friendship at times because of the business aspect of that relationship? Sure we did. But if Kevin called me and needed something right now, no matter what it was, if I had it, he'd have it, and vice versa. We'd be there for each other in any way. I'm not just talking about, in any way, we would be there for each other. Was that 4?
So you got Kevin Nash, you got Hulk Hogan, DDP, and Bruce Pritchard.
There you go.
That's pretty good. Rashawn wants to know if you and your team were giving the rights to own WCW of 2023, would you start running the company again? And also, how would you do it differently this time around? Like at this stage, I don't imagine you're interested in running a wrestling company. Fair to say?
No. I'm not interested in doing anything that's going to upend the lifestyle that I have. No, I like working. Don't get me wrong. If I can dive into something that requires 18 hours a day of my focus, attention, and time, but I can do it from my house, I am all in. I will outwork anybody in their 20s or 30s. If it's something I'm really excited about and I can do it from home, but the idea of being on the road and doing wrestling and producing television and dealing with the issues that come along with it, absolutely not interested at all. I'm grateful for what I was able to do. I wouldn't be sitting here with you and talking to you or living in the home I live in and the part of the country I live in if it wasn't for wrestling. So I don't want to sound ungrateful, but I also know what it took out of me, and I'm good. I'm real good.
Great question here from Chris. Eric, to the best of your knowledge, did Ted Turner ever approach Vern to buy the AWA?
No.
Do you think there would have been any value to, I mean, I know eventually Vince bought the tape library and all that jazz, but it does make me wonder, with the benefit of hindsight, why didn't somebody buy the AWA and just do like a a fake war. Like we had the whole bullshit invasion angle in '01. Like you could have done something with the AWA, right?
No, it was burning money. It wasn't just losing money. Vern kept funding it long after he should have. And if somebody would have come in to buy AWA, they would have looked at the books and run out the door. And at that time, there wasn't the creative opportunities and upside that there are today. You know, there was nobody interested in carrying wrestling on a cable outlet back then that didn't already have it in WWE. There was just no way. There was nothing there to sell. Interesting idea, but there was no value at all, creatively or financially or as a business.
G Stack George wants to know, what's Eric's favorite moment as a performer?
God, that's a tough one. It's either the Chuck and Billy wedding or working with Steve Austin at No Way Out in Montreal for two different reasons. The energy I felt in Montreal, because I was in there with Steve. It had nothing to do with me. I was in there with Steve and the story that we had, and I had some heat at the time. But the story between Steve, the backstory, and everything we did was so good. It was just so well done. That moment, you know, and again, Montreal, we all know Canadian fans are some of the best when it comes to, you know, big events like that. And because it was Steve and he was stomping a mud hole in me, the energy that I felt while I was getting kicked around the ring, it was so cool. It was palpable. I mean, I could almost taste it. It was such a cool feeling. But as a performer, because all I did was get the shit kicked out of me, that's not really performing. That's just being a punching bag, right? So as a performer, where I'm actually doing something other than getting my ass kicked, the Chuck and Billy wedding was phenomenal.
Yeah.
That was, you know, Brian Gewirtz. I think, you know, I still don't know to this day. I'm pretty sure it was Brian Gewirtz's baby, but the creative for that and the execution of it and the detail that went into it in terms of the makeup and the expense that went along with that performance, and it, you know, happened over protracted, you know, 4, 5, 6, 8 minutes of build up when I knew I was going to pull that thing off and wondering what the crowd reaction was going to be. That anticipation that was like bubbling up inside of my chest for 4, 5, 6 minutes, whatever it was, while I was out there, you in my thing, knowing at some point I'm going to do this and shit's going to hit the fan. That was exciting. And I don't think I've ever done anything as a performer where I actually got to do something other than get beat up that could have come close to that. That was cool as hell.
Another question here. This one is from GJ. My question is, who, in your humble opinion, made the best decision going to WCW from WWE? Not necessarily from a financial standpoint, but in terms of getting to do more in their WCW career than they did in WWE. I think this probably comes from, you know, the Bret Hart perspective, where people think, oh, well, that didn't really work out, but we know it did for guys like Scott Hall and Kevin Nash. But I think even people would wonder, did Scott Hall do more than he did as Razor Ramon? I would say with the NWO, the answer is a resounding hell yes. But is there somebody who stands out more than anybody else? Like, hey, this guy's career really took off. I mean, we know Hulk Hogan had so much success in the WWF, and then, you know, really got there again as Hollywood Hogan with the NWO. But is there one particular talent that really leveled up when they came over?
Well, you've already touched on Scott Hall and Kevin Nash, and you know, you can say, people can argue this until they're fucking blue in the face, but if Kevin Nash or Sean Waltman to this day get booked on an independent event, they're not wearing Diesel shirts. Kevin Nash is not wearing a Diesel shirt to the event. He's wearing his NWO shirt. Same with Sean Waltman. Certainly with Scott Hall before he passed. Those three individuals, while they were big stars in WWE, became bigger stars in WCW. You can argue that all the fuck you want and you'll be wrong. But I think a more interesting choice would be Randy Savage.
Mm.
Now, I'm not going to suggest that Randy did more or became a bigger star in WCW like Hall did and Nash did and Waltman.
But they weren't using him like that. You're right.
But, one of the reasons that Randy Savage came to WCW is because Vince had made up his mind that Randy was no longer going to perform in the ring and was going to be relegated to color commentary. And Randy didn't want to be relegated. Randy wasn't ready to step away from the ring. That's why he left. It's not because he didn't like Vince McMahon. It's not because it's not for any other reason, primarily, than he didn't want to stop performing, which I think we can all understand. Your father-in-law loves to perform to this day. Any great performer holds on to that passion for performing, like Mick Jagger. I don't know, Stevie Nicks. They're still out there performing, not because they need the money, but because they love the business. They love the connection to the audience. Randy wasn't ready to let that go, and came to WCW hoping. This is before NWO. This is before Hulk Hogan turns. This is before all that stuff. When Randy showed up at WCW, he made his big debut at center stage in front of 450 people. Probably 40% of them couldn't pass a breathalyzer test. So it was a big leap for Randy, and it turned out really well for Randy. Not bigger than what he did in WWE, not saying that, but it turned out so well for Randy based on where Randy was at in his career at that time that I think it kind of qualifies in a way.
Great question here from Greg Charles. If Eric had it to do over again, would he have held on to Mark Merrow and Sable? I always felt like shifting Mark from Johnny B. Bad to a street fighter with a hot second as a member of the NWO would have been a good fit in hindsight. I don't know that I would have made him a bad guy and had him join the NWO, but having him be a WCW guy with a hard edge defending WCW, I could have seen. Could you have imagined him shedding the Johnny B. Bad character in WCW, or do you think that would have been the persona till the end?
No, if Mark would have stayed in WCW, I feel confident that eventually, and I don't want to suggest that I had this plan in my head and it could have happened if Mark wouldn't have left. I'm not saying that. When Mark left, I remember the conversation we had. I think it was in the Atlanta airport. Is when he told me he was making a decision to go to WWE. And Mark was convinced that Vince McMahon, and I understand why Mark was convinced, because at that time, if you remember, it's funny, Vince McMahon, I'm going to sidetrack us for a minute and I want to go back to Mark. For so long, for so many years, all anybody ever talked about, talent and otherwise, was what a genius and how creative Vince McMahon was. That conversation has changed now over the last few years, obviously. But Vince did have a track record of taking talent from other companies, obviously. Look what he did with Hulk Hogan. He took Hulk Hogan from Verne Gagne in a pretty interesting way, by the way. When the book, The Six Pack, comes out, you need to read that book.
Great book.
Great book. Awesome book. Hopefully he's going to be something beyond a book pretty soon or eventually.
Roll Tide.
But back on track, I think, Vince had such a great reputation for taking marginal talent in WCW, or great talent in WCW, which was a marginal company at the time, and turning them into big stars. So when Mark came to me at the Atlanta airport and said, Eric, here's my decision, I'm going, and here's why I'm going, I couldn't argue with him. I couldn't try to convince him he was wrong. I understood what he was doing. I didn't want him to go, but I understood what he was doing and why he was doing it. But had Johnny B. Bad, Mark Merrow, stayed in WCW, there is no doubt in my mind that I would have shit-canned the Johnny B. Bad character and morphed Mark Merrow into something that was more realistic, because that was the direction I was going with a lot of characters. And because of Mark Merrow's boxing ability and history, I would have played him up as more of a badass, a Steve Blackman type of character. And I would have had him shed that Johnny B. Bad character, because it wasn't going anywhere. So yeah, I would have. And Sable, no, I would have never thought that. Sable was so introverted. When she would come to the arenas with Mark, you could just feel how uncomfortable she was. She was so quiet and so introverted that it wouldn't have occurred to me in a million years that that woman who I saw coming into the arena with Mark Merrill would have ever even wanted to step foot in front of a camera. So that would have never occurred to me, honestly.
Brian wants to know, I just this morning saw that WWE has a Big 12 World Order shirt. I've seen other NWO shirts where it's like a city, like the Dallas World Order. Is this one of the best marketing campaigns by WWE? And how mad are you? You didn't think of it back in 96. I think if you're mad about anything, you'd be mad that there's no royalty coming to you for any of this shit. And this was your idea.
Yeah, that does tend to bother me. Yeah. What could have been, right? If I just would have had that crystal ball.
It's unbelievable.
It would have been so much different.
Hey, since we're talking about NWO shirts, I wanted to get your take on this because I don't remember if I have this correct, but I seem to think that at the beginning, you couldn't just go to the merch stand and buy an NWO shirt. You guys had folks camped out in front of the building selling the shirts out of cardboard boxes like they were a bootleg. It wasn't actually like, it was officially licensed WCW merch, but it wasn't positioned that way. Do I have that right?
You know where I stole that idea from?
Brian Bosworth?
Nope.
Where?
Tommy Hilfiger.
Oh, really?
Yeah. I know that sounds bizarre, but I had read a story years before the NWO became a thing. Read a story how, and for those who aren't aware, Tommy Hilfiger is if I'm saying it right, Tommy Hilfiger is a clothing brand, but it's kind of a yuppie, country clubbish kind of brand, that kind of sportswear clothing. But what they used to do when they first launched it is they would take truckloads of that merchandise and they would leave it unprotected in certain parts of certain cities where they knew kids were going to break into the truck and steal the stuff and post pictures of themselves. It's like a badge of honor. And I think it was Tommy Hilfiger. I'm almost 80% sure that was the brand. Actually had a branding strategy where they wanted their merchandise to be a badge of honor in the urban community because that's where the market was. And sure enough, it worked. So when the NWO got hot, because of the nature of what the NWO was, it was kind of this invasion and they're not part of WCW and they're from the outside, coming in and all that. I didn't want their merchandise to be available at the merchandise stand because it kind of pops the balloon, right? Ruins the illusion.
Yeah.
So by making it feel like stolen merchandise or unauthorized merchandise,
bootleg
merchandise, it gave it an appeal and it became a badge of honor and it worked, but it wasn't an original idea. It was one that I just lifted based on a marketing story that I had read about years before.
I feel like it made me think of the Brian Bosworth deal. You may not know this story, but in September of '87, he joins the Seahawks. They're going to play against the opener against the Broncos, and he came in with all this fanfare from college and all this great success. And there were T-shirts being sold outside of the stadium that said "Ban the Boz." And like 10,000 Broncos fans bought those shirts that said "Ban the Boz." The seller of those shirts was Brian Bosworth.
Isn't that awesome?
He don't care. But I bring this up because it made me think of the NWO shirt and that it wasn't sold like officially licensed WCW merchandise at first. We know eventually it would be, but at first that was not the positioning. It was made to feel more bootleg. I bring this up because over the past week, AEW put out a devil shirt and it says, "I am him." And we see this masked figure that we've seen a lot in AEW programming in an MJF storyline that seems to never end. And in the bottom right-hand corner, it's got the AEW logo, and you can actually go on AEWshop.com and buy it. And I thought to myself, in 1996, Eric Bischoff had people selling the stuff outside of the building, and it felt bootleg. But if you could just go to the AEW shop and buy it, at least in this world of kayfabe, it feels like the next thing would be a graphic that pops up that says the devil is all elite. Like, I don't know what to make of that, but it feels weird. What say you?
I'm just not interested at all in that whole angle, the whole story. It's just.
Did it jump the shark for you? Did it go too long?
Way too long. Way too long. I don't look, unless the whole CM Punk thing is an illusion. It's not really happening. And CM Punk comes back as the devil under the mask. Whoever is going to be unfortunate enough to be revealed,
it's going to be a disappointment.
The devil behind the mask is going to be the biggest popcorn fart in the wrestling business that particular month, if not the rest of the year. It's a career killer. It's so anticlimactic that whoever it is going to suffer as a result, because it's been so poorly constructed.
Well, I am going to be the delusional optimist, and I'm going to say, let it play out. But I do tend to agree with you. The more something is built up, the more it seemingly sets up a disappointment. I mean, I've said this before, but years ago during the pandemic, when there was a signing that was going to be announced, Tony Khan teased that this is one of his favorite all-time wrestlers, one of the greatest wrestlers in history, blah, blah, blah. It wound up being Christian. And we know Christian is now almost been reborn. He's doing the best work of his career. I think he's a real MVP, not only for AEW, but the whole industry. I love his character work. I care. He has made me care. Yes, we can be critical of things here or there, but goodness gracious, I'm such a Christian fan right now. But I was in the stands that night, and all around me, I'm hearing people say, oh, it's Brock Lesnar. Oh, it's John Cena. Oh, it's The Rock. And I'm thinking, I don't know who it is, but it ain't none of them. And then when it's Christian, I heard people go, oh, but it's almost like you set this expectation where if Christian just showed up, these same fans would have lost their freaking mind.
And if Tony would have kept his freaking mouth shut and not said anything, and Christian would have showed up as just a stone cold surprise,
yes,
with no build up, his stock would have been 3 times higher.
Yes.
And it was because of what you just pointed out, which is so accurate and so true and so obvious. That's the part of, and I said this 2 years ago, relying on, this is the greatest thing. Dixie Carter, same thing. This is going to change. This is going to change the evolution of the wrestling business. Everything was like this monumental announcement that ended up being very blah. Right. You do that over and over and over again until the point where you can come out and say whatever you want to say, and it doesn't really matter because you've let your audience down. They no longer have faith in you. They don't trust you. They don't believe you anymore. When you lose credibility by overhyping, and who suffers? The talent suffers. You just pointed out with Christian. There's just no value in all that hype. There is zero value in all that hype. There is a tremendous amount of value in well-constructed surprises.
Well, I'm going to let it play out. I'm super hopeful that it's a big payoff and it's great and it's a big surprise. I don't want it to be Black Scorpion 2023. But I know that some fans, like you said, no matter what, they're going to be disappointed. And I know there's one thing you'll never be disappointed in, and that's a Hinson razor. This is one of my favorite sponsors we've ever had on the program. We're 300 episodes deep, and this is a sponsor that I will forever and ever use till I die. This is the best razor I've ever used. And I have so much respect and appreciation for how these guys put together their business. They didn't try to get in here and get you hooked on some gimmicky subscription. They don't have any planned obsolescence where this year's blades don't fit last year's razors. There's nothing proprietary about their blades, and there's no plastic. I mean, this should be the last razor I ever own. Hinson Razors, man. I just love this business and I love their story. They're a family owned aerospace parts manufacturer It's made parts for the International Space Station and the Mars rover, and now they bring that precision engineering to your face. You see, what they did is they used their aerospace grade CNC machines to make the thinnest razors you've ever seen. 0.0013 inches, which is less than the thickness of a human hair. And what it means for you is a secure and stable blade that gives you a vibration-free shave. It gets better. The razor has built-in channels to evacuate hair and cream, and that makes clogging virtually impossible. You see, a Hinson razor works with a standard dual-edge blade that, well, frankly, John Moxley's very familiar with. But it's going to give you that old school feel, like, hey, this is the type of razor my grandfather used. But it gives you the benefits of new school tech. Because while, yes, you could use a standard razor, don't you want the best possible shave? You get that with a Hinson razor, the thinnest razors you've ever seen. By the way, once you own the actual razor, it's only $3 to $5 to replace the blades. Not $3 to $5 a week or a month or even a quarter, $3 to $5 a year. I want you to really think about that. Really think about that. If someone were to ask you, hey, what are you spending on razors? Oh, I don't know, like a quarter and a dime a month. What? It's crazy. I can't believe that's even a real sentence. That's how affordable this is. Let's say no to subscriptions. Let's say yes to a razor that will last you a lifetime. I want you to try it. I have recommended this to so many people in the office and my friend circle and my family circle. I have one in my travel bag. I have one here at home. I have one at my vacation house. I believe in this. I've got my barber. That lady's been cutting hair 30 years. She uses a Hinson razor now and has all of her clients doing the same. When you try it, you will love it. It will make sense. It will click. This is it for you. Visit hinsonshaving.com/Eric to pick the razor for you and use the code Eric. You'll get 2 years worth of blades free with your razor. Just be sure to add them to your cart. That's 100 free blades when you head to hinsonshaving.com/Eric and use the code Eric. By the way, great Christmas present for your brother, for your uncle, for a guy in the office, for your dad, for your son. It's a home run gift. They don't know they need it, but they need it. It's hinsonshaving.com/Eric. Use the code Eric.
Hey, you know what? On Hinson Shaving, I left my razor in a hotel, I don't know, about 2 months ago. So I went back to the razor I was using prior.
Yeah.
Right. Kind of, it's got 3 blades in it and whatever. Very, very popular manufacturer brand. And I got so frustrated with it the other day. I mean, I get one, maybe 1.5 or 2 shaves out of a blade, which is ridiculous. They clog up so fast. I got out of the shower. Lori and I were going somewhere and she goes, you might want to go back and and you might want to go back. It's like, it was just a bad shave that the other day I ordered a new razor and then I had the option, standard 5 to 7 day, mail, 3 to 5 day mail. I chose overnight express.
Wow.
The shipping cost me half as much as the razor almost, but I was so anxious to get my razor back, my Hinson razor back. I never want to have to use anything else again. In fact, I'm going to go so far as saying this, and I know you're going to get pissed off at me, or you should if you don't. And Dave Green certainly will, but I know Dave will. I don't ever want to advertise another razor. I don't care.
I agree.
Even if Hinson says we're no longer going to advertise on podcasts, I never want to have to try to advertise another razor because I'd be lying. Hinson Shaving is the best razor and option available to any man walking the face of the planet on this given day or any other day going into the future. And I can't tell somebody that another shaver is as good or better. A razor is as good or better. I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to lie to our listeners. So I'm invested. Hinson Shaving for life, brother.
I love it. Delgado has a great question for you. With as big as wrestling is today, do you think WCW can make a comeback, being completely separate from WWE, or do you feel like it'd be better off as a memory? I think I know your answer to this one, Eric, but you sort of chuckled when I pitched the whole WCW thing. I don't know that we would ever get Raw or SmackDown or a big brand like that off the road. I think those will continue to be touring acts and make a bunch of money. But if we were going to go with the idea that we're going to have a residency for an attraction, if you will, in Las Vegas, like a Cirque du Soleil or what have you. And by the way, there's like a dozen of those shows over the years that have happened in Vegas on the Strip. What if there was, like, they called it a WWE Nitro, and you had a WWE themed restaurant and gift shop and little Hall of Fame type thing that surrounded, like, sort of like what Dorian's doing with AAA down in that mall in Cancun, where he's got like a dinner theater type thing. And it is a show that you just show tourists when they're coming in. But what if it looked and felt like Nitro? It had the old theme and the old sign and the old logos. And I do think a nostalgia thing as an attraction, I don't know, could that work? Could you see that?
You know, I mean, it's a fun idea to think about, isn't it? I mean, what if, my two favorite words.
What
almost
if?
Gets me horny. Almost gets me horny. I love the word. What if? But if you have a residence and you have the ability to have a themed restaurant and merchandise and all that kind of stuff, you got 7 nights a week. You got a book, right?
Yeah.
What if you have a Monday night WWE Nitro and it's themed and produced and you have the logos and it's a callback to, and maybe you have talent, especially younger talent that's developing. That's another great place, by the way. That's another great idea for that residency, is you have the ability to have your young talent working in front of a fresh crowd every night. That's an awesome opportunity. But you can have talent adopt the characters that were, popular in WCW. So you have a young character that's paying homage to Crow Sting or even Surfer Sting, and bringing those nostalgic characters to life in a current environment. And oh, by the way, you could do the same thing with NWA.
Yes.
Right? You could go back and have somebody being Harley Race, and paying homage to Harley or Dusty. I think that would be really fun. So you could have a WCW night. You could have an NWA night. You probably have to work with Billy somehow. But you could pay homage to some of the performers from different organizations, not just WCW, and then have your Friday and Saturday night or your big Saturday and Sunday show, whatever it is. That's your, Raw and SmackDown presentation, so to speak. But I think it's a cool idea. It'd be fun. It'd be fun to work on creatively. I don't know how effective or how successful it would be, but it sure would be fun. I could see the WCW brand as an homage type of presentation, legacy presentation, being a fun thing to do, but to try to create it as a storyline in today's world, man, it's been too long. There's nobody left. And those that are left shouldn't be in the ring participating.
C. Spartan has a great question. I know you've discussed issues wrestling had with advertising due to its reputation. However, did the ad sales teams ever consider pitching pay-per-view sponsorship to more adult-focused businesses like beer and alcohol companies? Seems like they would have been a great fit in the late 90s. I know briefly there was a sponsorship in WCW, before you got there, or maybe when you were there, with Coors, where, they had some Coors sponsorships, I think, around the ring posts and things like that. That was during the Herd era, though, really before you came to power. Was it just, these companies were nervous about young children watching the program, or was a beer ever within reach?
No. Now the way the beer business works is you have your national brand, you have your Anheuser-Busch, for example, but then Anheuser-Busch has local distributors. Now, some of those local distributors are massive, make ridiculous amounts of money. But some of them, like my local, beer Anheuser-Busch distributor here in Cody, Wyoming, is a small family-owned business. But your local distributors have discretion in terms of how they want to promote and where they promote in their market. So you could go, if you had a relationship, like, for example, if I was in the wrestling business today and I knew I was coming to Cody, Wyoming, I could go to the local distributor and probably convince a local distributor to do something on the ring posts and the local advertising, anything that was happening on a local basis. But if I were to try to go to the national office in Anheuser-Busch in St. Louis, you wouldn't get past the security guard if you told them you were from a wrestling company. The beer companies on a national level, corporate level, wanted nothing to do with professional wrestling. Oh, not because of the reputation, but because it was perceived in the market as a teen and preteen product. That's like, it's like going to Anheuser-Busch and saying, hey, we got Muppets on Ice coming, next week in New York's Madison Square Garden. Anheuser-Busch, would you like, because the parents bring the kids, so you're marketing to the parents. It's Muppets on Ice. It's a kid show. No, we're not going to touch it. And there was no way to overcome that. Not for us, anyway.
Here's an interesting question. Francis Reyes wants to know, what have you learned from Conrad the most during all this podcast, and vice versa? Conrad learned from you. Thanks for making fans happy from the UK. The thing I've learned from you the most is a lot of business stuff, but my favorite, and I talk about this all the time, and I've given you credit for this privately a bunch, the old different than, less than, better than. If you can't be better than, you're doomed to be less than. So it's best if you could find a way to be different than. And I've applied that to different areas of business in my real life. And it's become like a mantra that I use and credit you for all the time. So I think of all the things I've learned, more than, less than, different than, that's probably number one for me. I can't imagine you've learned a thing from me except that I'm a pain in your ass.
No, not true at all. I love you, brother. You've enhanced the quality of my life in a lot of different ways. But the thing that I think I learned early on, I observed and then continue to observe, is the value that comes with surrounding yourself with really quality people that you enjoy working with.
Yes.
You have, and not just on the podcast side of things, but on the mortgage side of your business, the quality of people that you have around you is so consistent, and there's such good people that it has made clear to me the importance of surrounding yourself with the right people and people that you can trust, and then letting them be the best. I know this sounds corny as fuck, but letting them be the best they can be. That you have illustrated that, the significance of that, in ways that nobody else has. That's the one thing I've really learned. It's the quality of the people you surround yourself with that really determine your success.
I'll take it. I love that. Ryan King wants to know, what is the most hot you've been at someone over something that happened during a show? Is there one thing that pissed you off above all else?
No, I can't even think of it. There's been so many. Oh my God. I couldn't even think of it.
Russo?
Nothing stands out. I mean, nothing, made me want to, grab a tire iron and beat somebody to death or anything like that. But there's been so many moments like that. It's hard to catalog them.
Drew Landry wants to know, I don't remember watching the Goldberg Hogan program after Goldberg won the title from him in Atlanta. Why did we not see that? What do you think about that? Why wasn't there a big pay-per-view rematch? I mean, that seems like that's a natural, easy thing.
God, I hate saying it, but I don't know. I'd have to go back and see what we were doing afterwards. Perhaps it's because that whole idea came together spontaneously. It wasn't part of a long-term plan. When Hogan called me one day when I was driving down the road and said, hey, I got an idea, let's do this. That was completely so far to left field and not part of any existing plan at the moment. So perhaps because it wasn't part of a plan and it did happen spontaneously, we just kind of picked up where we left off before that spontaneous opportunity came our way. That might have been the answer, but to be honest with you, that's the best job I could do of explaining that one.
Respectfully, I think it should have been the main event for Starrcade 98. I know we got Kevin Nash. I know the streak ended, but it feels like it's just right there. You're fresh off of this incredible match with Hogan and Sting, or maybe the match wasn't, but the build was. Do it again. Maybe it's Hogan and Goldberg at Starrcade, the big rematch. You could have still had shenanigans if you wanted it to be, or maybe the result of Goldberg keeping the belt would have been a catalyst to have that Hogan Nash match set up with the finger poke. I don't know, but it feels like if you were going to do it, Starrcade would have been the place to do it. Maybe.
I think you're absolutely right. We left a lot on the table by not following it up and not making it, whatever plan we had in place should have been modified and adjusted to accommodate that Starrcade match. Because you're right, that would have been, and there's so much. I mean, just sitting here, I get a little excited thinking about what the creative opportunities could have been. There's a lot of different ways you could have gone with that. That would have been a better choice, no doubt.
What's crazy to think about too, at least to me, is you've got this incredible pay-per-view that sets all kinds of records. Everybody knows the success of Starrcade 97 and how many buys it did. Fast forward to Starrcade 98, the two guys in the primary story that sold all those pay-per-views, Sting and Hulk Hogan, they're not even on the card at Starrcade 98, which is just like, how's that possible? But I mean, cause Hogan was there at Starrcade 94 and 95 and 96 and 97 and 98, nothing.
But then there's the argument, Conrad, where it's like, okay, enough already. Let's give us something new. Give us something fresh.
Yes.
So you're under that pressure as well to not just keep going to the well and doing the same things or versions of the same things over and over again. And maybe that was part of the reason why. I don't know. I don't think so.
It couldn't have been because 10 days later you did the finger poke and the belt was back on Hogan.
Yeah. So I don't know. I think it was just a matter of doing something different.
Well, I mean, you were so hot. I mean, it was still a huge financial success. It was like, you almost felt like at the time, I'm sure we can do no wrong. And maybe that's when you start to feel in hindsight, like, oh, maybe that wasn't the right way to handle that. Scott has a great question. If Eric only had 4 members total for the entire NWO run, what 4 would they be? So we know the first 3, I'm sure, Hogan, Hall, and Nash. Who's the 4th? There's just one. That's it.
Waltman.
Yeah, I think so too. Yeah.
I was wrestling a little bit with
Savage.
Conan.
Oh, okay.
Conan. Yeah. I think that's a tough, because Conan brought the edge.
Yes.
He brought so much
credibility,
street cred.
Yes.
He was so authentic and believable. And he brought a fresh edge to the product that up until that point hadn't been there. Not in an authentic way. So it's a tough one, but I would say Waltman.
Chris has a fun question. Given what you know of WWE's culture, do you think they're going to trust Punk this time around? Do you think they consider giving him a world title and be the face of the company? Or do you feel the potential liability of doing so is too high for them to want to do so?
I don't know the culture that exists today. I knew the culture that existed last time I was there. And I was and I'm going to be very vague, but I'm doing it intentionally out of respect. So please accept that. But I was in a meeting where Punk's name came up, and all of the key decision makers in WWE at that time were in that meeting. And that name came up, and the conversation lasted all of 3 minutes. And that was the end of that. That was the culture then. I don't know what the culture is now. I don't know. Triple H used to work for me. Paul Levesque worked for WCW before he went to WWE. But I never got to know Paul then. A couple conversations with him, really. Even when I worked with him when I first went to WWE as a talent, very little conversation with Paul Levesque. When I worked there in 2019 for a cup of coffee, that's where I interfaced with Paul Levesque more than I ever had the previous 20 years. But even then, I didn't really get to know him. So I don't know how Paul Levesque thinks and what his tolerance is for situations like CM Punk brings. I suspect that 2 things. One is I don't think CM Punk's going to even try to exert the kind of,
nope,
I'm going to call it bullying, right? He ain't throwing his weight around backstage in WWE anywhere. Right? The company's so much bigger than him. There's no room for that there, and nobody will tolerate it. And I think because of history, people will be watching very carefully how Phil Brooks, as an individual, handles himself professionally behind, because there's no question the CM Punk character is viable and is valuable. The question mark is Phil Brooks the professional that he needs to be to make it work? I suspect he probably is. I hope that Phil Brooks is going, wow, this is a hell of an opportunity. I can write the end of my own story. I can retire from this business on a positive note. And oh, by the way, I can pocket millions and millions of dollars along the way. But I got to be a team player. That's what I hope. And that's what I think is probably going on, because he's a smart guy. He has to be a smart guy to get where he is right now. But I do think that there's probably eyes on Phil Brooks in the way he conducts himself. But I don't know where the guardrails are. But I don't think it's going to be an issue. I really don't. I said this before he even went there. When the speculation was, you think he'll go? I said, sure, he'll go. If he has the opportunity, he'd be crazy not to.
Yes.
But he's not going to get away. There is no CM Punk running amok backstage. No one's going to get choked out. No one's going to be in fear for their life. You're not going to have the craziness and the mishigas going on backstage in a drama that went on in AEW, because it's an entirely different environment.
My mom used to say, you teach people how to treat you. And recently, Jeff Jarrett went to Sunday school, and the lesson that day he shared with us on his podcast. And it was, culture is created by the positive things you celebrate and the negative things you tolerate. And I thought, man, that's profound. I dedicated it to memory. And I think the culture in WWE right now, I don't see that happening. I'm with you. I think Punk's going to enjoy some great success, and this be the last big in-ring run of his career. And I think this ends a lot differently than a lot of the naysayers and doubters have said from the peanut gallery. Alexander the Great 39 wants to know, Eric, do you regret never having a WrestleMania moment? That's not something that people talked about maybe 10 or 15 years ago, but now we have started to hear that be a thing, a WrestleMania moment. Do you wish you had a WrestleMania moment?
I don't think about it.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm so grateful for what I have had and what I've experienced in the wrestling industry and what it's provided for me and my family. I don't regret anything at all. I'm glad I was invited to a few as a WWE performer. I got to be there and be a part of the team. And I say that with all honesty. I would have felt uncomfortable, quite honestly, having a part in WrestleMania, because I've always looked at my character as like garnish on the plate. It's not the main course. It's not the steak. It's not the potatoes. It's not the vegetable. It's not a side order of corn. I'm the garnish. I'm the little decorative stuff, the little pieces of parsley they put on the plate to make the presentation look a little better and bring it all together. And to give someone like my character time in a WrestleMania where you've got people who have really worked their whole lives for that opportunity, I would have felt guilty. Really, and I mean that. I would have felt awkward. Maybe not guilty because it would have been my choice, but I would have felt very awkward and uncomfortable had I been given one. So no, I don't regret that at all. It would have been, like I said, highly inappropriate in my opinion, creatively.
Adam Leeson wants to know, in Eric's opinion, who was the greatest mind in the wrestling business? And what's one wrestling event Eric would have loved to have been at that he wasn't? So let's answer that one first. Is there a wrestling event you would have liked to have been present for that you didn't have the opportunity to? Just with the
that's a great question. And I really appreciate that one because, and again, I'm not pitching this, I'm not hyping it, but when I read the book, The Six Pack,
yes,
by Brad Belugian. Now it's going to come out in April. You're going to hear a lot more about it on ad-free shows. You're going to hear a lot more about it on this podcast as we get closer to the release. But that book made me so interested in WrestleMania 3 that I wish I would have been a part of that, because that was a pivotal pay-per-view.
No doubt.
That, we talk about things that change the world, right? Or change the business. And we want to enumerate them all here. There's been several big pivot points. And that was one that I didn't appreciate to the extent that I should have, and now do. I would have liked to have been a part of that just because it's such an important part of history.
Carmine Rocco wants to know, if you were to start a wrestling company in this era and had everyone at your disposal, who would be your very first signing?
God, people are going to hate me for saying this.
I'm ready for it.
Randy Orton. I would want Randy to be, I'd want him to be now, I'm not suggesting that Randy would wrestle for the next 5 or 10 years, but
he's only 43, just so you know.
How old is he?
43 years old.
Yeah, he's 43, but he's been through a lot.
Yes.
Physically. I don't see Randy working for another 5 years. First of all, he doesn't need the money. And no. I think at some point Randy's going to want to spend time with his family exclusively. But that said, Randy Orton, he would be my Rock. He would be my Stone Cold Steve Austin. He would be my Hulk Hogan, right? He could be our Undertaker, because he's got so much credibility in the equity that he's built in his character and his name over the past 20 some odd years. Would be hard to beat. And again, not that he would be the world champion for an extended period of time or anything like that, but if I was going to launch something and I wanted it to have credibility and people to at least give it a chance, I'd want Randy there. And then I'd be looking at people like LA Knight, and I'd be looking at some of the younger, newer talent that's coming up. But my first call would probably be to Randy Orton.
Thomas J wants to know, was there ever any interest in signing Owen Hart? Did it ever come close after the screw job in 1997?
No. And I can't tell you specifically why, because I don't remember. And because it never even came up in conversation. There's nothing actually to remember, probably because Owen was under a long-term contract and there was no option for Owen to make a jump or for us to reach out to him. Likely that was the situation, but it never, ever came up in conversation.
Well, something that I think should come up in conversation more often is pet insurance. We've been talking about Embrace here for the past several weeks, and I'm going to continue to, first of all, because we really believe in this. Eric and I are dog lovers. I know we sometimes seem like assholes and jerks to each other here on the program, but man, we're not for our dogs. Nikki, Ginger, and Baby know their dads have all the love in the world for them. And I'm sure you feel the same way about your dogs. I mean, they're more than just a pet. Whether it's a cat or a dog, whatever, it's more than just your pet. It's a part of the family. It's a really big part of your life. And our partner in Embrace Pet Insurance, man, they're just going to give you peace of mind for a really valuable member of your family. I mean, let's be real. Having a pet is expensive. From natural pet food to pet sitting when you go on vacation, the cost can skyrocket quickly. But one thing that's definitely worth it for your fur baby is pet insurance. This podcast is sponsored by Embrace Pet Insurance because we believe it's time for you to upgrade your pet insurance game. Whether you have a dog or a cat, Embrace Pet Insurance has customized plans for your pet's exact needs. And you need it now more than ever. Vet prices have increased by 1/3 from last year to this year. Yeah, 33% from 2022 to 2023. But with Embrace Pet Insurance, you can visit any vet or emergency clinic. Not only that, if you're like me and you have multiple pets, you're even eligible for a 10% multi-pet discount. They even have a 24/7 helpline and optional wellness rewards. They're trying to help you prioritize preventative care for your pet. Well, hell, we hope you never need Embrace in the first place. But this is something that's near and dear to me because my daughter lost her pet of 9 years earlier this year. And man, it was emotional. It was just a bad experience. And if you've went through that, you know what I'm talking about. But her and her mom were faced with something right before that they never imagined. Hey, we've got this surgery we could do. It probably won't work, but it could, but it will definitely cost over $6,000. Unfortunately, that pet passed away within an hour of that conversation. It was too late, but there wouldn't have even been pause had there been insurance in place. I'm happy to say Ginger and Baby are covered with Embrace Pet Insurance. I think your pets should be as well. Just read the feedback, read the reviews. Everyone agrees this is what's best for not only for your pet, but your family as well. Your pet's a part of your family. And unfortunately, finances are just a reality of life. And if you can eliminate the idea and the option of even having to make a decision, just know I can do what's best for my family member and it's not going to negatively affect me. That peace of mind is what Embrace really does for you. So don't wait for the unexpected to happen. Join this massive community of pet owners who trust Embrace Pet Insurance to protect their pet. Head on over to embracepetiinsurance.com/83 weeks and sign up for pet insurance today. Make sure you go to embracepetiinsurance.com/83 weeks or else they won't know that we sent you. That's embracepetiinsurance.com/83 weeks. Matt Ryan says, Eric, you've spoken about your admiration for Pat Patterson. Did you meet Pat during your WWE tryout? If not, what was it like to meet him when you finally debuted in 2002?
I did not meet Pat during my tryout in 90 or 91. I think it was 1990. I did not meet him. I met Lord Alfred Hayes. I actually did, I think for part of my tryout, I did play-by-play on a match in the studio with Lord Alfred Hayes. So that was pretty cool. But that was it. And I didn't meet Pat until 2002. And we just hit it off, you know, and when I first got there, I was like, I'm just going to keep my head down, my mind, which is what I do anyway. You know, I'm not a social animal at all. And when I would go to television tapings, I would do my business. Now I would hang out after the shows in the bars and watch the replay on TV with everybody and things like that. But typically when I got to WWE, I did none of that. I just kept to myself. And one night I was sitting after a show, I was sitting at the bar and completely alone. And Pat came up and sat down next to me and he started telling me old Vern Gagne stories and Nick Bockwinkel stories and Ray Stevens stories. And Ray was a good friend of mine, someone that I really enjoyed being around when I was in the AWA. So it was so much fun listening to those stories. And by the end of that first night, I think we probably sat at the bar for an hour and a half, maybe. And from that point forward, man, he was, other than Bruce Pritchard, you know, Pat Patterson was one of the only people that I'd really talked to during the entire course of a day or evening, other than the people that I was working with. But we really got to be pretty good friends, and even more respect for him. The more I got to know him, the more respect I had for him, especially his creative abilities. But he was funny too, man. He'd get frustrated. He reminded me of Vern sometimes. He'd see things or hear things, or he'd get frustrated with creative, and we'd sit down and talk about it at the end of the night. God, I don't believe it. It was so much fun watching him and being around him. He's a great guy.
We got so many questions here. I don't think we can get to all of them. I'm going to bounce around a little bit and make Dave Silva's life hell, but I'm really excited about a couple of different questions. One, and this is interesting for me as a collector. Ronnie wants to know if there were 3 pieces of memorabilia that you could retrieve from your time in wrestling that meant the most to you, what would they be and why? I know you're not really a memorabilia guy. We can see behind you. We know you've got your Hall of Fame, you know, plaque where you went into the WWE Hall of Fame and things like that. And we know now, thanks to our friends at Paint Your Life, you've got that awesome portrait behind you. But if there was like an artifact from your run in wrestling, a piece of ring used or set used, or just a part of WCW or the WWF, well, all of your wrestling days, hell, the AWA too, what would like be 3 things you would have liked to have hung on to somehow?
Oh, I think I would love a representation of the most important moments, points in my career. Obviously, an AWA logo would be great, to have up on that wall somewhere. The WCW Nitro on the set, I believe there was like this gray kind of big bold letters, WCW in the Nitro. I really would love that, because Nitro was a defining moment in my career as a television producer, not just a wrestling guy, but as a television producer. So that would be really cool. I don't think I didn't contribute really that much to WWF. I don't look at that part of my career as something that I would consider important to me financially, and in terms of fun. But I don't think I contributed anything there that makes anything stand out that I can say I was really a big part of that. Again, I was a garnish on a plate, and I was the best garnish going at the time. But maybe the poster, some kind of a poster, with Steve Austin and I leading into No Way Out, probably, because that was, again, other than Chuck and Billy, and that's a different thing. That was a pretty cool moment for me. And I guess something from that event would be cool.
I wish you had all of what was left that night of your mask and makeup, the big reveal. If you could find a way to preserve that in a glass box, that would be cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That was fun. I get a kick out of it. You know how it is, on this date,
yes.
Whatever. So every year on the anniversary of that Chuck and Billy wedding, I probably get no fewer than 50 or 75 people sending me that clip, and it makes me smile every time.
Alex wants to know, Eric, what is the Nitro segment you were in that you had the most fun with the NWO?
Firing Pee Wee.
Yeah.
Randy Anderson.
Yeah.
That was freaking awesome. And there was a lot of other ones, but that when that was believable.
Yeah.
I mean, it actually was believable, unfortunately, to a lot of people that complained to Turner Broadcasting Human Resources because I fired somebody on national television in front of his children. They actually believed I did. So that was cool. When you can hit that kind of a nerve in a professional wrestling show where everybody that comes to it knows that it is scripted entertainment and nothing is real, they believe that was real. And that's like a
hell of a compliment.
That's like the professional wrestling version of an Academy Award.
Yes.
That's pretty freaking awesome. When you can get people that wound up because they thought it was true, that's pretty awesome. So yeah, that was it for me.
Terrell Lewis wants to know, Mr. Bischoff, at any point, did you ever consider bringing Tully Blanchard in?
No, and for no specific reason. I think I was led to believe that there was an injury that made it impossible for Tully to come back, even if anybody wanted him back. But his name never came up. Keep in mind, I wasn't familiar with Tully Blanchard. Tully Blanchard was a big deal long before I came to WCW. He was a very important part of the Four Horsemen and Crockett Promotions and all that. But that was all before my time, so I wasn't firsthand familiar with Tully Blanchard. I learned about Tully Blanchard after I got to WCW when I first arrived as a talent, but it was very, I didn't learn a lot about him. So it just wasn't a name that came to mind when I was in a position to look for talent.
Interesting question here from 80s Kid Yelling at Clowns. He wants to know, after Brett joined the company after Montreal, Neidhart and the Bulldog came along. Was there ever any talk of having them appear with Brett similar to the Hart Foundation did in the WWF? I think that was
probably, and again, I want to be clear. I was involved in some things creatively. I was very involved in NWO related material and a few other things, but there were a lot of other people involved with creative as well. And I do believe that there was probably conversation early on about, hey, if Brett's coming, perhaps there's an opportunity down the road. So let's bring this talent in because it's available. That I think was probably the context of those conversations. I don't believe there was anything. And again, it's a Kevin Sullivan thing. Kevin might have a different perspective and a different answer because he was also, deeply involved in all things creative, not just the NWO and some of the things at the top of the card, so to speak. So perhaps there was, not that I was a part of, but it doesn't mean it didn't happen.
Couple great questions here. Dan Potts wants to know, any truth to the rumor you wanted to have a Nitro or a pay-per-view at Yankee Stadium?
No.
Adam Leeson says, I read somewhere WCW was planning to run Madison Square Garden. Is that true? Was it ever an option?
It was an exploration, but we got shut down immediately. The contract, the agreement that was in place between MSG and Titan Sports at the time was such that WWE maintained a perpetual first right of refusal. So if any wrestling company wanted to book a date at MSG, Madison Square Garden was, by way of their agreement, it was a very friendly agreement for obvious reasons, was obligated to give WWE the first chance at that date. So in effect, we were blocked out. There was no way WCW or any other wrestling company was going to promote a live wrestling event in Madison Square Garden because WWE would have the option of taking that date first. You just couldn't get in.
Here's a great question that we've not spent any time talking about with you. Miguel wants to know, how has wrestling affected your marriage? Is it hard to have a relationship while being on the road so much?
Again, I wasn't on the road as much as professional wrestlers were, talent. I was on the road a lot. And from 93, 94 to the end of 98, I was gone a lot, but not as much as a talent and a performer. It worked out well for us. I made my family the priority, even though I was gone a lot. When I was home, my focus was on my kids and my wife. Not that I didn't bring work home with me. Occasionally I did. There were nights during the week when I'd be on the phone till midnight or 1 o'clock in the morning. All that shit did happen. But I spent a lot of time with my kids and my wife. I was able to bring them with me a lot. I brought my kids with me to Disney when we were shooting for 7 or 10 days at a time and made it work. I have an amazing, Lori and I have been together now for 42 years.
Unbelievable.
Married this summer in August, we will have been married for 40 and together for 42. So to say that I have a solid, happy marriage is quite the understatement. So, a lot of it has to, the majority of that has to do with my wife.
No doubt.
I would say it's almost all her. I tried my best to be a good husband and a good father. And I think I was a pretty good dad. Good husband.
You're a good salesman, but she's the glue for the family, right? I mean, Mrs. B keeps it together.
She keeps it together.
Yes.
She always has.
Let's do an interesting question here. And boy, it's kind of rude, but I know you'll have some fun with it. FF Handbook wants to know, if every penny you have was invested into a wrestling company that had to be booked by either Tony Khan or Vince Russo, who would you choose?
I think Russo can be fixed. There's enough there to work. I think Russo would be a very valuable part. I think he would be a valuable part of a creative team. Where Russo went wrong was being the guy. He can't be the head of anything. But I do think there's enough there with Russo that he could be fixed and he could be a valuable part of a team. I don't feel the same way with Tony Khan. I see patterns there, and I don't know Tony Khan, really. I know who he is, but I don't know him. But I see the patterns, consistent patterns, repetitive patterns that indicate to me that that's not fixable. So I would reluctantly dump all my money into a Vince Russo situation where I would try to find a way to fix him and keep him from being the sole practitioner when it came to creative.
I'd put my money on Tony Khan. Tony Khan's going to have a lot more connections to pull the nose up financially. Mike Macklin.
But wait a minute. That's not the question. The question was if I was financing.
Yeah. That's right. But I'm just saying, Tony Khan, I'm not talking about he's going to write a check and reimburse you, but I'm just saying he's going to have inroads in the entertainment, sports, and finance world.
Yeah, but you got to deliver on it. You've got, at the end of the day, all your relationships and all your connections in the world aren't going to matter if you've taken advantage of those opportunities and been unable to deliver because you don't have the inherent talent and instincts that are required to be successful in that business.
I know you said, and I hear you, there was criticism about whether or not Tony could work in a team without you actually saying it. Cause you just kept saying Vince could be a part of a team. I get that. But aren't we sort of glossing over the fact that Tony Khan started from absolute scratch and I know you said top line doesn't matter, but on some level it is the only metric we can use. His top line gross. It's the biggest for any wrestling company outside of WWE since WCW, right? And only the best years in WCW would have been there. I'm not saying that WCW didn't have better years. I'm not arguing that, but I'm saying top line gross. You got to give the man some credit here.
Not really. I don't.
Why?
It doesn't matter. And there are other data points that we can point to other than top line gross, which I think is very, very misleading. And it's a PR point. It's a headline. It's a Dave Meltzer dirt sheet.
No,
headline.
It's not. I mean, people talk about it as a draw. If we're going to, from an entertainment, from a promoter perspective, how much money did they draw? That's the verbiage that people use. Draw means top line. It doesn't mean net. No, we can have a separate conversation about managing the business and the budget and all that sort of things. But I'm saying in terms of generating revenue in the wrestling business, besides only a handful of WCW years, Tony Khan's generated more than anybody in wrestling history besides Vince. Like there's not been a territory or a wrestling promotion that did 170 or 175 million in a year outside of WWE and a handful of WCW years, right?
Quite a handful. I mean, WCW, and again, I don't want to this is not important enough to get into the math, but adjusting for inflation, there were plenty of years before WCW became profitable that it was generating on a adjusted for inflation basis, more money than AEW is right now. That's not really a true statement. And again, I don't think it really matters. It's interesting. It's a data point. I'm not denying it's interesting. And does Tony Khan deserve credit for spending his inheritance or a portion of it, I should say, to create this wrestling company that is his fantasy? Sure. Absolutely. And I don't mean that with any snark involved. Absolutely. He's put his money where his mouth is and he's pursuing a dream. And I think that's admirable. But in terms of if you were buying a business right now, or if you were looking at AEW as a business investment, I don't think you would invest in it unless it was an emotional investment or a hobby. Just the top line is interesting, but you've also got, look at the ratings. That's also a data point that we can look to aside from the gross top line revenue. Where's that going? The answer is down. It's not even flat anymore. It's trending downward slowly, but you look at what's going on with Collision. It's collapsing. You look at what's going on with Rampage. It's almost a punchline. It's embarrassing.
It's a Wednesday business. Yeah.
And you look at what's going on with Dynamite. It's at best flat.
Yes.
And probably year over year in the negative.
It's down a little bit. Yeah.
About 11%. So, whoa, what's to get excited about?
Well, I think what's to get excited about is you just look at, let's imagine that we're starting from scratch when Ted Turner bought out the Crockett's. So let's fast forward 5 years. We're like where WCW was in 93. That's kind of where AEW is now, timeline wise. And I think I would argue that AEW today is doing better timeline wise than WCW was in 93. Now we know right around the corner, 94 Hulk Hogan's going to be there, and man, it's a whole new world. Not arguing that. But in 93, I think I might argue that AEW might actually be doing better than WCW was 5 years in. Top line.
Yeah. Well, we can go back and find that number, I'm sure somehow. But I would guess you're right.
Yeah.
I'm not denying that. But I can also assure you that WCW didn't throw nearly as much money at WCW in 1993 and prior to 1993 as Tony Khan has in AEW. He spent a lot more money launching that brand than Turner was spending on WCW at the time.
Well, because one owned a television network and one didn't, right?
Right. And one's getting $45 million a year in licensing fees and the other didn't.
Yes.
So these things are so different.
Yeah.
Economically and in terms of the business model that it's really unfair and unrealistic to compare them. Take the television revenue out of AEW right now.
Yeah.
And tell me how they're doing. Now you can compare AEW today to WCW in 1993 and tell me who's outperforming who.
That's an interesting way to look at it. Mike wants to know, you mentioned before liking the former announcer, Chris Cruz, but having to let him go once you discovered something. Can you talk more about that?
No. Let's just say if someone was working for you, Conrad, and you found out that this could be any individual.
Right.
I'm not saying, okay. But if you found out that they were taking advantage of situations financially that was inappropriate, you'd fire them whether you liked them or not, because you got to trust the people you work with. And I'm not saying that Chris Cruz did anything illegal or anything like that, but there was a pattern of behavior that was concerning. Let's put it that way.
Copy that. Matt Richards wants to know, was there any thoughts for a Paul Orndorff and Hogan feud when Hogan arrived in 94, considering how big the business was for them in 86 in the WWF?
No, I think Paul had and I don't remember what the injury was, but
atrophy in the arm, right?
Yeah. Well, I think it was a neck injury that caused the atrophy in the arm. So I'm going to call it a neck injury, and I may be wrong about that. And I apologize if I am, but I think the injury, whatever it was that led to the atrophy in the arm, was significant enough and was a no-go as far as in-ring performances go. So there was never a conversation. Paul was excited as hell to have Hogan there, but it wasn't because, maybe I can get a match with him someday. No, it was never a conversation.
Let's have a conversation about what I know you're going to be talking about with your spouse and your family conversations in the coming weeks. Shopping. It's always hard this time of year. I've always got somebody who's hard to buy for. My wife and I have had several of those conversations. What do we need to get for so-and-so? I don't know. Well, here's a little pro tip. Give them the gift of better sleep with our friends at Miracle Made. I'm such a fan of these sheets because they're silver infused. And I know what you're thinking. What? Silver infused? What does that do? Here's what it does. It prevents 99% of bacteria and requires 3 times less laundry. You may not realize this, but your sheets are gross. That's the reason you have acne. That's the reason you wake up with a stuffy nose. There's more bacteria, more than likely, on your bed sheet than there is on your toilet seat, which is just crazy. So why not get a little life hack with our friends at Miracle Made? They're making silver infused bed sheets that were actually inspired by NASA that prevent 99% of the bacterial growth, leaving them to stay cleaner and fresher 3 times longer than other sheets. Not only that, those silver infused fabrics, that's going to be in your favor. It's going to do some thermoregulating. It's designed to keep your bed at the perfect temperature all night long so you get better sleep. Who doesn't want better sleep? And by the way, you want to talk about comfortable. These sheets are as nice or nicer than what you would see in like a 5-star hotel. but at a fraction of the cost. And that's why I think Miracle Sheets are the perfect gift for your spouse, your friends, or your family. Who doesn't want better sleep? Who doesn't want luxurious feeling bed sheets? And since these come with 3 free towels, you wind up getting 2 gifts in one just in time for the holidays. Go right now to trymiracle.com/83weeks to try it today and gift it to someone special this holiday season. Do both. We got a special deal for our listeners. Save over 40%. And if you use our promo code 83weeks at checkout, you'll get 3 free towels and save an extra 20%. By the way, Miracle's so confident in this product, it's backed with a 30-day money-back guarantee. So if you aren't 100% satisfied, you'll get a full refund. Upgrade your sleep with Miracle Made. Go to trymiracle.com/83weeks and use the code 83weeks to claim your free 3-piece towel set and save over 40% off. Again, that's trymiracle.com/83weeks to treat yourself, a friend, or a loved one this holiday season. Eric, we got a question here about our podcast. Tad Brown wants to know, when this podcast started, what were your realistic expectations? Did you ever dream you'd get to 300? I think the answer is no on 300, but what were your expectations, Eric, when we first started this pod?
I didn't have any. And the reason for that is I had tried a podcast with Nick Hausman, and it was fun up until a point. And, the chemistry wasn't right. There's nothing against Nick. He's a hardworking guy. He's very passionate, but the chemistry wasn't there. And I learned a little bit about the podcasting business. I didn't really know much about it. One of the reasons I did the podcast with Nick is, I had been approached by other people about doing a podcast before Nick, and I'd ask questions because I knew nothing about the podcasting business, really, other than I could Google, find out quickly. But when I asked questions of Nick, he had answers, and I felt like, okay, this guy at least knows a little bit about the podcasting business, certainly a lot more than I did. So let's give it a try and see what happens. And that's the way I approached it with Nick. It didn't turn out well. I mean, it wasn't horrible. It was an unsuccessful attempt at a podcast. And I had pretty much washed my hands of it and decided, well, it's just not for me. It's not going to work for me. And then Bruce Pritchard, you and Bruce were having so much success. And obviously I was in, constant contact with Bruce. And I was looking at his success and looking at the numbers you guys were creating, so that however the subject came up of maybe, trying one with you, it's like, well, hell yeah. I mean, if there's any chance at all of me being successful in this podcast space, I want to do it with somebody who's proven that they can do it in the wrestling business. So doing one with you was an opportunity that I was very much excited about because of the success you created with Bruce. But I went into it realistic. And one of the things I've learned in life is I like setting goals. One of the reasons I went into this 5-day water fast was because I felt like I really need to go back and focus on my discipline, because I've become very undisciplined in my day-to-day life because I can be. And that sounds arrogant, and I don't mean it to be. But it's great to be able to do the things you want to do with the people you want to do it with when you want to do it. That's freedom to me. But it also set me up for complacency. And Lori and I were driving. This is going to be a long-winded answer, but I promise I'll get to it. Lori and I were driving back from Minneapolis from Thanksgiving. We were with my brother and sister and her family. We're driving back. We're in a conversation. We're listening to some podcast. And somewhere along the line, the phrase "comfort is a thief" came up. And it almost stopped me mentally in my tracks, because it was kind of profound to me, because it applied to me. Comfort has been a thief. It's stolen my discipline. My comfort has overtaken my discipline, to a degree, my drive and ambition, because I'm just too comfortable. And I've quit challenging myself. I used to challenge myself all the time. Learn something new, do something new, attempt something you've never attempted before. That's always been kind of part of my makeup, right? And I've lost that edge over the last 10 years or so. Now, back to the podcast and expectations. Part of that has been I've learned how to manage my expectations because I'm not driving, because I'm not challenging. I approach projects with the idea of I'm going to put 100% into it. And if it's fun, I'll keep doing it. And if it's not fun, I won't. And that's exactly the way I approached doing the podcast with you because I didn't know. I didn't know if you and I would have chemistry. I didn't know if I was enough, if anybody gave a shit about anything I had to say to even listen to a podcast I was on. And I was realistic. I don't have the super high inflated value of who I am. Never have. But I thought, what the hell? It's working for Bruce. This guy Conrad knows what the hell he's doing. Why not? Give it a shot. If it's fun, it'll work. That's the other thing I've always believed. If you work hard and you have fun, the money will come. It's inevitable. It'll happen. And that was my only really expectation was, is it going to be fun? And there were a couple of times early on where it almost wasn't fun. You know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
You got hot. I got hot. I hung up. We stopped the podcast. And for a minute I thought, well, that's a last podcast I'm going to do with this guy. He's not going to want to do it again. And I'm not sure I want to either. And I thought about it for like a minute and I went, okay, that's not right. So I called you right back. We had a conversation. Everything was fine.
Yes.
But, and I'm really glad we did have that conversation because this has been a blessing, to be honest. But it was fun. After that little speed bump, it kept getting more fun and more fun and more fun. And going back to one of the things that we talked about earlier, one of the things I've learned from you and with you, and as a result of doing this podcast, is I've learned how to look at, forget about success. That's easy. Everybody can look at success. Everybody does look at their success. Very few people look at their failures or mistakes or shortcomings and really embrace them and analyze them. One of the things that I've learned doing this show with you is to be able to be mature and look back at the decisions and the choices that I've made and analyze them and accept them for being mistakes or errors in judgment or shortcomings and not beat myself to death over it. That's how you learn. And fortunately, it's been getting more fun. This is a different kind of show. You and I haven't had this type of a show before, and it's fun. I enjoy doing it. I got to go on ad-free shows with Casio the other night, and we had some of our ad-free shows. But I had the most fun that night that I've probably had in 3 weeks. Just, it's been a blessing, but it's been fun at the same time. And because it's been fun, and we've worked at it, not just you and I, but the team of people you've got working with you, it's been financially successful. So the formula works.
Great question here from OPW Chris. Recently, the XFL and the USFL announced their intent to merge in 2024. In the future, could you see this new spring football entity, presumably having The Rock's involvement, become part of TKO? They offer wrestling and MMA. Football could expand their content offering. What do you think? Could you see The Rock, given his family relationship with Nick Khan, could you see The Rock bringing football to the TKO opportunity?
Wow, that's interesting, isn't it? I never would have thought about it. And I don't know enough about
their business.
Their business model and what the opportunities are. I inherently, every time, spring football comes up, I just kind of look the other way.
Yes.
Because I just can't wrap my head around football in the spring.
Because it's never worked.
I just can't.
It's never worked.
But if I could overcome or set aside that reaction and just look at perhaps the model or the business model that could maybe work, be an interesting conversation for sure. Definitely something I would explore.
Yeah.
But I still have a hard time getting over the spring football hump. I just do.
Lucas wants to know, which wrestler besides Bret Hart do you wish you could have done more with in WCW?
I can't think of one. I say, Rey Mysterio, Chris Jericho, but those guys weren't ready for prime time back then. That play wouldn't have worked if we would have thrust one of those guys into that main event, carrying the company. And I don't mean just putting him on a main event in a pay-per-view. That's easy to do. But I mean, a Sting kind of build, a Goldberg kind of build, the Hogan NWO kind of build, the Randy DDP kind of build, that younger talent that went on to become and prove that they should have main event opportunities, the Jerichos, the Rey Mysterios, the Eddie Guerreros and such. Down later on, yes, they earned that opportunity and proved that they could carry it to a degree. But they weren't ready back then. So as much as, hardcore wrestling fans and people that, live in the dirt sheet narrative, that's why you went out of business, because you didn't make Jericho a world champion. Yeah, okay, great. Have fun with that idea. But at that time, the timing wasn't right yet. And of the people that I think about that should have had main event opportunities, I kind of think most of them got them. DDP, certainly Goldberg. I think Sting became a bigger name as a result of the NWO and the Crow character than he was as Surfer Sting. It's almost like we reinvented him.
No doubt.
Hall and Nash, we've already talked about. Waltman, we've already talked about. Look what we did with, I can go on and on and on. I don't feel like there's anybody that I should have done more with. In hindsight, sure. I would have liked to have kept Chris Jericho. I've talked about that a lot. Wanted to keep him. Offered him a lot of money to try to keep him. But Chris was right. Chris knew the timing wasn't right in WCW for him, and he went to where it was.
Interesting question here from Adam. We've never talked about this before. During your time running WCW, well before internet piracy was an issue, there were cable hot boxes. Were hot boxes ever a concern for you when you were looking at pay-per-view revenue, or did you simply look at it as something out of your control and didn't give it a second thought?
Well, you bitch about it, complain about it, but it was out of our control. It wasn't us. It wasn't up to WCW to try to find a solution for that. That was a pay-per-view. It was a DirecTV challenge. That was a challenge for the pay-per-view providers themselves. It wasn't something that WCW could have, and in any way, had any kind of an impact on.
Terrell Lewis wants to know, you've talked about reducing and ending house shows when you took over WCW to reduce losses. In your opinion, given the drop in attendance, do you think AEW would benefit from running smaller venues for their weekly shows, or would that give the perception of the company being smaller? It seems like weekly shows and smaller venues would present really well on TV.
Great question, and an even better observation. And I follow WrestleTix on social media, kind of keep track of the trends of what ticket sales are doing for WWE and AEW. And you look at WWE, they're going into 10,000 seat arenas typically for a Raw or a SmackDown, and they're selling 10,000 tickets. You look at AEW and they're going to 10,000 seat arenas and they're blocking it all off, and they're having a hard time selling 5,000 tickets. So right off the bat, you're spending a lot of money for an arena that you're using half of. Number one. The real negative impact that has is the energy. I would rather have 3,000 people in the right venue than having 5,000 people in the wrong venue. And the reason for that is those 3,000 people in the right venue, meaning a venue that's built for 3,000 or 4,000 people, a smaller arena that's filled and people are shoulder to shoulder, creates a communal environment. It makes it more fun. It's like going to a bigger, cooler party. And the energy is so much different when you've got your people in a relatively confined area, all close proximity. They're not spread out all over the place. The energy in that environment is palpable. It's noticeably different in the venue, but it's also different on television. You feel it. You see it. People become more animated in their seats because they're all having fun together. It's like a big party, as opposed, think about it like this. It's like you get invited to a party and you go to somebody's house and there's 2 people in this room and there's 5 people over there and there's 4 or 5 people there and there's a couple people outside and they're all having fun. But you walk in there and there's just no vibe. There's no energy. And you go down the street to another party and there's people in every room and they're laughing and they're joking and they're telling stories and the energy is completely different. Which party are you going to go to? Which part are you going to tell people about when you go to work on Monday? And that's what's happening to AEW. They're, for whatever reason, I have no idea. They're booking these big venues and they're struggling. I saw one the other day, they're scaling these things down to 4,000 people. Well, why go to a 10,000 seat arena to do that when the energy and the vibe is dissipated? Go to smaller venues. The energy will be different for the talent in the ring. The energy will be different for the audience, and the consumer experience will be greater. And the energy that you deliver to the households with using television, watching your show, will be noticeably different. And your viewers at home will actually feel better about watching a show that looks like everybody's having fun at, just like going to a party.
Squeegee Luigi wants to know, can you talk us through the Hall of Fame ring process? Do you get to select what finger it goes on? Is it engraved? How far ahead do they get your ring size?
I don't remember. Number one, I don't think I was asked which finger. No, I wasn't. And it's a good thing they made it for my right hand, because I broke a knuckle on I can't wear a ring on my left finger. I can't get it over my big knuckle on my left finger. And if I were to be able to figure out a way to get it over, I would never be able to get it off. You'd have to cut it off.
Mrs. B still falls for that line?
No, it's true, man.
I'm just kidding.
Show you next time I see you.
I'm just kidding. I've seen that.
Couldn't possibly get a ring on my ring finger. But I don't remember. I don't remember how they got my ring size. They must have asked me at some point. I just don't remember the conversation or the email.
Blaine Shores wants to know, what was the thought process behind the diamond plate look for Nitro? I always thought it was a cool look for a wrestling show.
Just wanted to have an industrial kind of vibe. It's the best way to say it. The fire, the sheet metal, the textured aluminum, the color schemes. I wanted to be very urban, industrial kind of a vibe.
Suave Beardson says, Bash at the Beach 96. Hogan stays red and yellow. Sting is the third man. Walk us through the next year on how that would have played out. If you didn't have plans that far ahead, just fantasy book it. Let's talk about instead, how would the match have happened? Like, we know that if Sting was going to be the third man and we weren't sure, it's Sting, Lex Luger, and Macho Man against Scott Hall, Kevin Nash, and a mystery partner. We know at some point during the show, we're going to cart Lex Luger off. I assume this would have meant, if it would have wound up being Sting is the guy who gets sent to the back and Sting returns, and that's how the reveal is happening? Or what is the execution in that particular match of how Sting becomes the bad guy?
God, I don't know, man. I can't come up with that sitting here on this show. That's something that you and I would have to sit down over a beverage or two, and I'd need a couple hours with to play with. I couldn't possibly figure that out right now, or even have fun trying to figure it out.
Matt S. wants to know, you've talked about Mike Tyson's WWF involvement being a pivotal moment in changing perception of the company and helping Austin reach another level. If Tyson hadn't signed with the WWF and instead cut a deal with WCW, do you think it would have slowed down the Austin and WWF momentum significantly?
Yes. I think it was that pivotal. I mean, it wasn't the only thing, right?
Yes.
Having Mike Tyson wasn't the only reason everything took off, but it was such an important part of it. It's like if you take the 2 out of H2O, you don't have water. You know what I mean? I think if you took Tyson out of that formula, you wouldn't have had the Austin McMahon story that you had, because there wouldn't have been that catalyst. There wouldn't have been that powerful visual, emotional moment that really launched Mr. McMahon in Austin. So I think, yes, it would have had a major impact if Tyson would have been in WWE, or if Tyson just wouldn't have been available for WWE. I don't think the Austin McMahon's story would have started off as hot as it was.
Great question here from Jake. In the book Nitro by Guy Evans, it was said that you had an idea to fake your own death in a helicopter crash and come back as a ghost at a Halloween Havoc pay-per-view. Can you elaborate on this more?
Yeah, it wasn't a helicopter crash. It was a plane wreck. And at the time, I had my own airplane. I was a licensed pilot, obviously, and I was licensed to fly high-performance complex aircraft. And I had my instrument rating. I was really into it. And I'd done a lot of flying around the country. I used to fly myself to Nitros, anytime it was within probably 700 or 800 miles of Atlanta where we lived, I would fly myself. Excuse me. And because I was so into flying at that time, I think I was down around Arizona, flying around southern Arizona somewhere for some reason. And I got fairly close to the Mexican border. I had to be very aware of that because you don't want to fly into the Mexican border, unannounced. But anyway, somehow that spurred the idea. I think it was like in the summer leading into Halloween Havoc, late summer, and Halloween Havoc was coming up with ideas. And I thought, whoa, wouldn't it be cool if somehow I could create the illusion, and I'd already thought about how to do it, create the illusion that I was flying around southern Arizona, inadvertently, evidently had found myself in Mexican airspace, got lost, and my plane crashed somewhere in Mexico. And I was presumed dead. I could have pulled that off because people wouldn't have been able to find out. You can't call, the Mexican version of the FAA, especially back then. Nothing, you didn't have the internet. It was a different world back then. So I could have faked me disappearing in my plane in Mexico and being presumed dead. I could have orchestrated that illusion. And I said, okay, I want to do this. So I knew, I would tell my wife and my kids, and I wasn't even going to tell my parents were alive at the time. I wasn't going to tell my parents. I wasn't going to tell my brother and sister. I wasn't going to tell anybody other than my wife and my kids. But I had to run it by Harvey, obviously. And when I ran it by Harvey, and by the way, here's the scenario. When the time was right, somewhere between Halloween Havoc, I was going to disappear in Mexico, presumed dead as a result of a plane crash. My plane just fucking disappeared off the radar and all that stuff. I could have faked that. And then just hide for a month or so. And then show up at Halloween Havoc, not as a ghost, but as a part of a scene where I'm coming back from the dead. I guess that's a ghost. But I wasn't going to be like a hologram or anything like that. I was going to be me, but everybody would have thought I did. It was like I rose from the dead, so to speak. So I went to Harvey with that idea. I was so excited about it. My wife was not, by the way, but I was going to do it anyway. And I went to Harvey, and I think he thought I was joking at first. And I kept pressing it. And he said, Eric, you're the president of a division of Turner Broadcasting, which is a publicly held company. And I know you don't think this to be true, but that kind of thing can get us in trouble with the SEC. When you're faking the death of an officer of a division of a company, not a good idea. The risk is not worth the reward. So he shut it down, and I wasn't able to do it. I would have, if he would have greenlit that, I was going to do it.
I'm glad you're not dead.
No, I wasn't going to get near dying. I was just going to get down.
Jake from the Windy City wants to know, what are your favorite TV shows of all time? He wants you to name your top 5.
I used to love MASH, Black Sheep Squadron. I used to love that show. And again, because I was a pilot, I used to love it. It was about World War II pilots in the South Pacific.
So MASH and Black, what'd you call it?
Black Sheep Squadron.
Okay. So there's 2. I know you like the Animal Kingdom. Does that make the list? Succession? Does that make the list?
No, okay. That's modern times. I would have to say
all time favorite 5.
All time. Succession would have to be there. Breaking Bad absolutely would have to be there.
Sopranos make the list?
I liked Sopranos, but it wasn't not as much as everybody else. I didn't like it as much as Breaking Bad. I mean, maybe it'd be number 4, number 5. I still go back to MASH. I guess, putting it in modern day, I probably wouldn't put Black Sheep Squadron in there, but yeah, I think that's about as close as I could get to a top 5.
One last one. Dan wants to know, is there anything you're sick of being asked?
No.
Well, all right, there you go.
I mean, every once in a while, depending on my mood, if I get asked a question, especially on this podcast where I know people, 300 episodes, 600 hours, I doubt there's a lot of questions that haven't been asked, at least in one way, shape, or form. But that's the thing, is a lot of times a question, it could be on the same subject, but it comes at you from a different angle,
right? Which
requires me to think about the answer from a different perspective. Actually, Cassio, the other day, we were talking after we wrapped our thing for After Shows, and he said, it's really, he paid me a compliment. I was appreciative of it. But he said, it's really interesting. I know you've been asked a lot of these same questions, but you make the listener feel like it's the first time you've ever been asked. And it's not that I'm trying to pretend it's the first time I've ever been asked a question before. Is that so often, the basis of the question is the same, but the perspective is slightly different. And that forces me to think about the answer from a different perspective. And I actually enjoy that. So it's never like, oh, I can't believe somebody's asking me that question, because it's an invitation for me to think about the answer from a different perspective. And it keeps me on my game. So no, I never get bored.
Well, thank you guys for keeping us on our game for over 300 episodes. Next week will be episode 301. We will be back right on time. We're going to be talking about your relationship with New Japan and WCW, the ups and downs and everything in between. I think officially now we've had more episodes of 83 weeks than there were Nitro, which is crazy to think about. Hey, by the way, if your business targets men that are 25 to 54 years old, there's no better place to advertise than right here with us on 83 weeks. Find out how effective and how affordable it can be for your business at advertisewitheric.com. Just in time for Christmas, you can check out Grateful by Eric Bischoff. It's available now on Amazon or bischoffbook.com. An ultimate stocking stuffer. And if you can't find what they got there, or maybe they already have that, man, there's tons of new swag over at boxofgimmicks.com, including the infamous Muckerfuther hoodie. All that and more available now at 83weeksmerch.com or boxofgimmicks.com. Love to have your social interaction. If you've got a question for us about the New Japan WCW relationship, or just want to pick Eric's brain about what's new in his life with the water fasting and everything else he's got going on, it's at 83 weeks on Twitter, or directly, he is at eBischoff. I am at Hey, it's Conrad on Twitter. On Instagram, he's at the real Eric Bischoff. I'm at Hey, it's Conrad Thompson. And of course, the best, cheapest, easiest way to support the show is to support us on YouTube. Throw us a comment, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, turn that notifications bell on. It's 83 weeks on youtube.com. And in the new year, we're going to have new content every single month exclusive to YouTube. You don't want to miss out on that. They will be interactive. It's 83 weeks on youtube.com. Eric, I never know what to sit down and expect whenever we do an Ask Conrad, or Ask Eric rather. We did over 3 hours of picking your brain today. I had a lot of fun, man. This was, I like just bouncing around and covering a lot of different topics.
Yeah, it's fun to change up the format every once in a while and just engage with the audience. And again, spurs different trains of thought, different conversations. So I appreciate it very much. Thank you. And thank you everybody that's sending questions.
And I guess I should ask, I didn't mean to keep you 3 hours. Do we want to talk about the water fast today, or do you want to do that next week? Once you've started?
Next week, here's what I'd like to, since I'm starting a carnivore diet. I was going to start tomorrow, but I'm actually going to start today. The 5-day water fast, I did it because I wanted to challenge myself, as I talked about earlier, but the health benefits are freaking amazing. And I know I'm going to sound evangelical about this, and I don't suggest everybody, because we're all different. We all have different metabolisms. We have different lifestyles. We have different goals. So there's no one size fits all. I'm just going to tell you about me. I did this not to lose weight or anything else. I did it because I had to challenge myself to do something that I don't normally do. and to be uncomfortable because comfort is a thief. And it was relatively easy for me the first day because I've been doing intermittent fasting for quite some time, 16 hours on, meaning I wouldn't eat anything for 16 hours and I would eat over 8, or 18 hours on and eat over 6-hour window. So I was used to not eating a lot for extended periods of time. So the first day was a breeze. Second day got to be a little more challenging. But the third day, I had this overwhelming sense of well-being that I'm still enjoying now. I went off the fast on Friday. It's just like I've never had before. It was almost spiritual. It was spiritual, actually. And there was a clarity of thought that I have not experienced maybe ever. My thought patterns were crystal clear and concise. My ability to focus was just something I've really had a hard time with my whole life. It's one of the, people I said, oh, you've always got so many things going on. It's partly because I have a hard time focusing on any one of them. And I knew that is slowing me down in my personal and business life. So I really wanted to attack it. And everything that I read about a water fast says that it provides you the opportunity to do just that. And I wasn't sure I'd experienced it or not. On the third day, about 3:00 in the afternoon on the third day, I went, whoa, this is what they're talking about. Fourth day was a bit of a challenge. I actually got physical hunger pangs. I'll call them not pain, but there was a discomfort. I was so hungry, but I was able to manage that very easily with ice cold water with a little bit of electrolytes in it, and it took care of that. In fact, that night, Lori and her sister were making pizza, and I was sitting in the den watching television. I'm going, oh my God, that was a bit of a challenge. But like I said, I just, chugged down some ice cold water with some electrolytes in it, and I got through it. Fifth day, I woke up and said, okay, I can break this fast. And I almost did it an extra day. That's how good I felt. I'm going to do a 5-day water fast every month for the rest of my life because the health benefits that come with it. And I encourage people to research it. This thing called autophagy, where when you put your body in a stressful situation like I did in a fast, your body actually kills off old, dead, unhealthy cells, and they get passed through as waste. And you get a natural surge of human growth hormone that your body produces naturally. And you produce all new cells to replace tired or diseased cells or dead cells. I love that idea. And for that reason, and because I just feel so freaking good when I do it, and it's not that hard. The only downside, Conrad, was that my sleep pattern was really disrupted. It was harder for me to fall asleep. Like typically I get ready to fall asleep around 8:30, 8:45 at night. And I wake up at 5, 6 o'clock in the morning. I'd be up till 10:30 or 11 and I'd wake up at 4 o'clock in the morning. So my sleep pattern was greatly affected, but it didn't hurt. I still had great energy throughout the day. I didn't have the weakness, a little bit of lightheadedness day 2, day 3, a little bit for 15 seconds at a time or 10 seconds at a time. But I loved it. I love it. I encourage people to do your own research before you jump into it, because it is a bit of a challenge. Do your own research. Make sure you're relatively healthy and go for it, because if nothing else, you'll experience it as a challenge.
I can't wait to learn more and check in with you next week, see how it's going. If you've got questions about that or New Japan, be sure to hit us up at 83 weeks and tune in next week right here each and every Monday to 83 weeks with Eric Bischoff. Hey, it's Conrad Thompson. And there's one thing we can all agree on. Health insurance sucks. It's confusing, expensive, and frustrating. Well, for the last several weeks, we've been telling you that there's a better way. Welcome to the alternative that is Crowd Health, created to get rid of the headaches of health insurance. Here to tell us more about Crowd Health is the founder, Andy. Andy, what's going on, man? How are you? Thanks for jumping on.
Hey, thanks for having me. Doing great. Can't complain.
Man, in reading your story, I can see why you looked for an alternative. For our listeners that don't know, tell us why you started an alternative to health insurance.
Yeah, it was right around this time of year, several years back, where I was coming off of my old company, and so didn't have health insurance. Most of us get health insurance through our companies, and so I went to Obamacare, healthcare.gov, and got a plan. It was $1,200 for me, my wife, and my two girls, and I kind of joke it worked until I had to use it. My little one, who was 1 at the time, was having recurring ear infections, and so we went to the ear, nose, and throat doctor, who said she's got a hole in her eardrum. You have to get surgery. So head off, got surgery, 15-minute procedure, got the bill, $8,000 for 15-minute procedure. And little did I know, the insurance company a few weeks later was going to send me a note saying that they wouldn't pay for it. It was medically unnecessary. They wouldn't pay for it. So it was at that point where I was like, man, this health insurance does suck. We have to come up with an alternative. I've been super fortunate. I can write an $8,000 check, but most people in the United States can't write an $8,000 check, and it's putting people into bankruptcy. So we've got to figure out a different way to do healthcare that keeps people from going into bankruptcy, is easier to use, allows them to get better care. And so that's why I started Crowd Health.
I've actually read where over 250,000 people, over 250,000 families with insurance still wind up declaring bankruptcy due to medical bills. Can that be right?
Yeah, I mean, that's a crazy thing about our system, is you can have health insurance and have a medical event and still go bankrupt. So for my example, a pretty benign thing happened. This happens to lots of kids all over the place, holes in the eardrum because of recurring ear infections, and it was $8,000. So, if you don't have $8,000 in the bank, that's going to put you into bankruptcy. The other thing I found out is with some of these Obamacare plans is in 2021, it's the last data that we had, 48 million claims were denied. So, I was, one of those people. One of my claims were denied, and it's fine if, $100 office visits denied, but what happens when a $8,000 or $15,000 or $20,000 claim gets denied? That puts people in really financial, difficulties. So what we've done with Crowd Health is say, hey, you pay the first $500 of a health event. We have a community that will help you out with the rest. And so if you go to the ER, if you have a surgery, if you have any big health event that you can think of, cancer, it's $500. Anybody should be able to come up with $500. And so, over the last 3 years with 6,000 people as a part of Crowd Health, nobody's had medical debt. Nobody's gone into bankruptcy as a result of healthcare. And so that's something we're super proud of.
Hey, something I wanted to ask you. I know one of the things that everybody hates about traditional insurance is having to choose a doctor from a certain network. With Crowd Health, can you only still see certain doctors, or how does that work with Crowd Health?
When I was starting the company, it's the first thing my wife asked me, because she'd be always the one that would ask me, is my OBGYN in network or out of network? Yeah, that's a great thing. You can go anywhere you want. We don't limit where you can go. So if you have a favorite doc or pediatrician or whatever, there's no networks to worry about. All we ask that you do is go and say, hey, can you give me the cash pay rate? And typically that cash pay rate, funny enough, is 30 or 40% less than what they get from a big health insurance plan. And so that's what makes this model work, is we're just getting way better rates for our members than even health insurance plans the biggest companies on the planet get for their members. So that's the beauty of this system.
Well, Andy, you've told us how it works when you go to the doctor, but what about prescriptions? How do prescriptions work with Crowd Health?
Yeah, here's the great thing, right? So if you have a health event, like I said before, is you commit to paying the first $500, and then anything after that, then we submit to the community. So whether that's a follow-up visit, whether it's imaging, so let's just say you have cancer, and there's going to be many doctor visits, many imaging visits, many prescriptions. All of those things are included in that health event. So you'll pay the first $500 of that health event, and then we'll submit the rest to the community. And so those prescriptions and everything is included in that. And we've done, everything from a $49 pediatrician visit to a several $100,000, brain hemorrhage. We've got 5 or 6 cancer cases going on right now. We've had, I think, 150 babies. So, it's not only for these little events, but these big events too, which include, some of these prescription drugs that are really, really expensive.
Let's talk about the cost. I see where it's simply $175 for an individual or just $575 for a family or 4 or more.
Mhm.
What do you get for those fees, Andy?
Yeah, I mean, so any of the big events, you get the 500, it's $500, and then you have a community. What you get is a community behind you who will help you with any of those big events. But the other cool thing that you get is you have a care advocate at Crowd Health. One of the things I hate about health insurance is when I call in, I'm talking to a call center in India somewhere that I'm telling them about my health event, and then they don't know what to do, so they punt me to somebody else. What Crowd Health, you have a person internally that you can call anytime you want to. They're going to help you through in whatever health event that you have. They'll provide you access to also online virtual urgent care. So if you have an urgent care thing pop up, my daughter fell off of her bed a few months back. We called a virtual urgent care. They were able to take care of it, as opposed to us having to go to the hospital to take care of it. You get unlimited virtual primary care, so you can go on your app and there's a primary care doctor that you can talk to pretty much any time of the day. You have talk therapy, so unlimited talk therapy. So if you wanted to have some counseling with an online counselor, you can have unlimited online counseling. So all of these things are incorporated and more into the Crowd Health service.
Well, our listeners already know this, but I want to take a minute here to remind them, because you listen to our show, you can get started with Crowd Health today for just $99 per month for the first 3 months when you use our code WRESTLE to get the health care you deserve. Learn more at joincrowdhealth.com. Andy, thank you so much for coming on and telling us more about Crowd Health today.
Thanks, brother. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Thank you, and happy holidays. Be sure to check us out at joincrowdhealth.com. Use that promo code WRESTLE and you'll get Crowd Health started for $99 a month for the first 3 months at joincrowdhealth.com with the promo code WRESTLE.